We'll call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order. Before we do get going, I do want to remind everyone to either silence their cell phones or turn them on to vibrate or turn them off so we can kind of keep the interruptions to a minimum tonight. I do want to say it's great to see so many faces out here, and just remind everyone we do have City Council meetings on the first Monday of every month, unless it falls on the second because of a holiday. Roll call, please.
Janser.
Here.
Olson. Here. Pittner.
Here.
Padrigula.
Here.
Straight.
Here.
Wolski.
Here.
Sitma.
Here. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Number 3 on our agenda tonight is ordinance number 5315 on second reading.
So moved. Second.
We have a first by Alderman Wolski, a second by Alderman Janser. Any discussion on the ordinance that is on the screen for the goose mitigation? Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, just a brief thanks to staff for bringing this forward again for expedited consideration on second reading. This was a request by the Park Board to allow them some additional flexibility out at the golf course.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Olson. Yes. Pittner.
Yes.
Padrigula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Sitma? Yes.
I said you first.
Oh, okay.
Second.
All right, that takes us to number 4. Motion does pass. Takes us number 4 on our agenda tonight, and that is the discussion for the President's message. To that, I will turn to Alderman Janser.
Thank you very much, Mayor Sitma. I guess the President's message that I wrote has been public since I think the 4th of the month, so I think everybody's had a chance to look at that. I'm not going to read it. I guess I would like to point out that you know, it is hard not to be able to find big amounts of cuts to make, and therefore concur with the need to raise property taxes. Certainly, you know, a minimal reduction or no reduction was a target that we all would have liked to achieve, but given the circumstances that we have and faced with the 2 largest infrastructure projects that the city has ever undertaken, you know, it's necessary to pass this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, President Janser. Yes, Alderman Padrigula.
Yeah, I wanted to publicly compliment Mark as City Council President for his budget message. I was waiting to see what it would contain, and I appreciate it. And I'm saying this publicly. I would have said it privately, but I didn't do that, and I want to do it publicly. I appreciated your invitation, his invitation for input. And what was particularly important to me, besides input, which I think is his prerogative, we can all offer input at a meeting, what I particularly appreciate is the fact that this was disseminated to us and the public way in advance and gave us the time to look at it. That was the thing that has irritated me no end. Probably my greatest source of irritation in all the years I've been on the council is having to make decisions on the fly. And this was very different. And I really, really appreciate it. I think that's very important. And it's very good for the process. So I wanted to publicly commend our council president for doing that. I also am, I guess, impressed too with his courage in not making any kind of, not proposing any kind of, maybe theatrical is too strong a word, any kind of cuts to look good. I think he called it as it was. And things are challenging. And I really appreciate that candor and the recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Padrigula. Any further discussion on the President's message before we move on? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Sitma. I guess I too appreciate President Janser's message and candor and the challenges ahead of us. I guess something I've been stewing a lot on over the last couple of weeks and probably the last month in general has been we're recovering from a natural disaster. We're trying to fund the two largest projects. I think we all understand that. Some in the community are going to be recovering in probably for the rest of their lives, financially speaking. And that is it's hard to quantify that. Many of you have obviously heard that over the course of the last few weeks, but it's something that particularly has weighed heavy on me as Mayor Sim. I clearly know that you're carrying additional financial burden as a result of the flood, and many people in our community are. And unfortunately, many of those people are strapped, and that is something I think we have to be incredibly mindful of moving forward in all aspects of the discussion, and be mindful tonight in particular when the conversation gets a little heated that we can easily pass it off, but people are struggling here, and it's something that I'm keenly aware of myself. So I commend you, Alderman Janser. I thank you. This is tough. Anybody can run for this job, but we were elected to lead, and I'm not looking to kick the can down the road in my tenure here, and so I just wanted to state that at the outset tonight.
Thank you, Alderman Straight. Any further comments or discussion before Alderman Pittner?
Again, I'd like to thank President Janser and Alderman Janser for your message, and also to the city staff for preparation of this year's budget. Obviously, it wasn't hard, kind of coming in with a knife to your budgets and your departments, asking you to find every little penny you can to save taxpayers. But again, I'd like to kind of play my part, as Alderman Straight said, as a leader in the community now, and say this is a long time coming. This is years of, as you said, kicking the can down the road. This is years of course correction. Let's use an analogy of a flood. A lot of water over the course of a summer, our river can handle it. A lot of rain events, 11-inch rain event, 7-inch rain event, all at once is difficult to overcome. We have a flood of course correction on our plate right now, and that's what we're dealing with. We can get through it as a community. And I really don't have a lot of concerns with the message or the budget, for that matter. However, the one thing that does disturb me as a councilman and a community member is our maybe overwillingness to invest in flood protection. And it was told to me to always get my opinion out there, so I feel this is my opportunity. We currently, as a city council and as a city, have a contractual obligation to commit half of 1 penny to flood protection. Currently, we contribute 78% of 1 penny to flood protection by diverting funds that go into Magic Fund, community facility. It disturbs me that this is a flood protection project that benefits 12 different cities and 4 different counties in our area, and the city of Minot sales tax is, and maybe I can be corrected if I'm wrong, the only current local contribution to that project. At a previous meeting, Alderman Straight stated that when we were discussing putting an opening in the Ann Street Bridge, by the Ann Street Bridge in the flood wall, he said he doesn't live in a world of fear, so he wasn't afraid of putting an opening in there. And I agree. I could not agree more. I do not live in a world of fear. That's why I do not see the logic in draining our community and putting every last penny when there's so many deferred projects and deferred infrastructure projects from roads, road maintenance, backlog. We have Fire Station 5 that's been booted from our budget. We have a new city hall that's been booted from our budget. Last year we made a gesture to the taxpayers by going after scheduled pay raises of our police officers. We saw how that worked out, and we can't, at the expense of our most important people and being our citizens and the people that work in this community, we can't do that anymore. I would like to see us as a council, and I get closer to that 50% contribution, because I have full faith in the Service River Joint Board that they will be able to obtain funds like they've told us they are obligated to do and find additional funding sources. But I just cannot, in good faith, continue to pour money into a project that this paying generation will pay for and the next 40 generations will benefit from. And I guess that's kind of my thought on it. If I had any thought on the message, diverting the magic funds, I would like to see some of those funds put into some of this backlog and this kind of wish list that we need to invest in our community, because like I said during my campaign, we can build these flood walls, we can build them as high and wide as we want, but if we don't have anything behind them, I probably won't live here. I'll be honest, I question who would want to live behind a wall with poor roads, poor fire protection, poor infrastructure. And that's kind of my thought. I'd like to take some of those funds and invest back into our community in other areas to make some of this burden that we're living with, this financial burden from being flooded and recovering. And I live in the flood zone, and I would love to see this community be invested in, not just in a wall. That's it.
Thank you, Alderman Pittner, and perhaps we can get into that a little more once we get into the public hearing and get deeper into the discussions, and perhaps afterwards as well. Any further discussion on the President's message before moving forward? Seeing none, that will take us up to the public hearing on the proposed 2019 budget. I do have just a couple of remarks before we do get into this. Certainly, we have a lot of folks here tonight, and I appreciate that, and I'm very happy to see so many people that have come out to talk. Process goes, as you do come to the podium, your name and address for the public record, so that we have that, and certainly be respectful throughout this process. We understand that the emotions can get a little bit wild, but please be respectful as we will as well. Also respectful of other folks' time. If we can spend 5 minutes or no more than 5 minutes at the podium per person, and that would give other people the opportunity. And if after all of the questions are asked, if you still have more, certainly we would welcome you back to have those further discussions. But please, as we have a lot of people that may want to come forward, keep your time to 5 minutes to start with. For the questions, I will ask that you don't, we do have department heads up here at the dais tonight, so that we can expedite the process for Q&A, so we don't have folks moving back and forth at the podium tonight. And then certainly we're here tonight to talk about budget. If this is about individual tax assessment, we are not going to get into the individuals for what your property tax assessment was. And if you do have questions or concerns, we can certainly set up a time either afterwards or get a hold of Mr. Turnus to set up an appointment to discuss that individually with you on your thoughts on your individual assessment. Now, specifically regarding the budget, to this point, we have had many, many meetings. We went through several workshops and then public meetings outlining the principles of the budget and the details inside of it. And all of those details and presentations are available on the website and the city's YouTube channel to review in full detail at your leisure. And certainly all of that does follow through the delay in the capital purchases, as we had talked about, and many of the cuts that have come before, even before we got into the preliminary budget. That being said, I do want to also quickly mention this. Several social media discussions have centered around using federal grant dollars to fund our general budget. Now, I cannot stress enough that federal grant dollars cannot be used for those projects that were outlined in the grants. They can be used for those specific purposes and no other use. The National Disaster Resilient Grant dollars cannot be used to build flood control. Moving the structure of home that was Home Sweet Home was done using the NDR grant and not through property taxes. The parking ramp situation is currently in litigation, and the full council directed staff to budget for protecting the city's investment of the structure by placing the protective covering against future deterioration of that project. And finally, I did want to touch on NAS. I recently had a discussion with a group, service group in town, and asked, before I even got into the process, raise your hand if you know what NAS is. NAS was. There's a lot of folks in the community that haven't been around long enough to understand what NAS is and why it's important. A very brief recap: conceptualized back in the 1970s, adopted within the city and the state in the 80s. Project began in the 90s to bring Missouri River water to Minot and throughout the NAS pipeline systems for communities throughout North Dakota to provide not only a steady supply, but a healthy supply of water to many communities that otherwise do not have access to good potable water through their own well services. It is not only vital for this community, it's vital for North Central North Dakota and the future economic vitality for what we hope is processing and manufacturing down the road, which requires a substantial amount of water. I don't want folks to get the idea that NAS was being thrown under the bus in any way, that this is part of a long-term project that is finally coming back online and is going to be a substantial asset to our community in the future. With that, we do not have a formal presentation. As I mentioned, we do have all of that available online. If you do want to come up and ask a question or have some comments, please come and state and say your name at the podium, and we'll try to do this in an orderly fashion. I'm sorry, yes, thank you. Before we get to that, I did overlook this. Thank you, City Manager Barry. We did have a very small amendment that came in at the last moment regarding a J grant, and City Manager Barry, if you would kind of give us the details that we need to make a small amendment to this beforehand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. City Council members, I want to draw to your attention a memo that I sent out earlier today requesting a slight modification to the budget, actually 2 slight modifications to the budget. The first modification is a request to add in the JAG grant to the general fund. That JAG grant was something that the police department had applied for, but we did not know that we were going to receive it. So we put the funding in to cover that expense. Now that we've received the grant, we'd like to add that revenue source into the budget. That essentially would reduce the mill levy by $4,519, or an overall reduction of 0.02 mills. The second small adjustment was to add in the storm sewer development revenue, which was inadvertently missed in the development of the preliminary budget. I apologize for that. This will not result in an increase to the levy, but it will result in an increase to the cash reserves. However, those reserves are programmed in 2020 for this work. So just wanted to make that correction as well.
Thank you, City Manager Barry, and we would look for those adoptions within any motion coming on later in the evening.
Yes, sir.
With that being said, the podium is open, and we're here for you to listen and to answer questions tonight. Somebody has to go first. Mike, can you come press the little gray button down at the bottom of the mic to make sure that the light is on?
On that one?
Thank you, sir.
Hello?
There we go.
Okay. My name is Mike Enslin. I live at 1714 Fifth Avenue Southwest in Minot. First of all, I want to address what Sean said about the parking garages. I don't know, I think most citizens think that that was a debacle, and I don't know who, I know that some of you weren't responsible for that parking garage mistake, I think. Now we have to take care of it and possibly improve it, spend more money on it. I don't see it being used. I think we should cut our losses, either sell it or tear it down. I just don't see why we still are trying to recover from that 2 parking garages that we never needed in the first place. Does anybody on the council think that we needed that and we still need it? Sean? Okay.
Mr. Enslin, I'll be happy to just briefly go through this.
Okay.
Dating back into even the 90s when I first came to Minot in 2000s, downtown was asking for a parking ramp long ago. So I think it was something that the community had wanted, and certainly in 2012, I think when the idea to construct those, we can't change what has happened in the past, but I think we can change what is going to happen in the future. The cost to tear them down would be so much substantially more than what the benefit we will see out of them right now. And the hard part is we really can't do much with the ongoing litigation right now. And we do have some financial responsibility until we get through that litigation. Once we get through that, I foresee a substantial asset into the downtown community regarding the improvements that have been made and will be made through, I think, public-private partnerships or just private investment. But more so, I think that they're going to play a part, especially considering Trinity in 3 years, in repurposing or redeveloping some of those properties because of proximity. It's really tough to look at some of this in the face now because the holistic picture isn't there. We are developing some ideas on how we can start programming to get more folks to use those right now, but certainly we're not going to see a break-even point on them for a couple of years. I can almost say that with certainty, and it's one of those where it's like a long-term investment. You're not always going to get your money right up front.
I don't agree with you, but that's okay. Now, the second thing I want to say is about the budget. We all have budgets in our households to live within, okay? If we have a cut in our money, our income, we have to adjust to that. We don't go to our neighbors and ask our neighbors to give us an extra $1,000 or whatever to live on or to go out to dinner. We cut our budget. We don't go out to eat. We maybe don't buy more clothes. We cut our budget. Personally, I think that our budget in Minot could be cut more, and there's many, many things that you've all went through over and over and over in the budget. But the property values in Minot have went down, and because of that, there's less revenue. So now you want to increase the taxes, the mill level, so you can get the money back up where it was. I don't, I've been in Minot a long time, since 1981, and I've never had my taxes lowered. So my personal feeling is that everybody, like out at the federal government, on the base, civil service, in the military, they come down every year and say, we're going to cut your budget by X amount of percentage. Across the board, everybody has to live with it, and they do. I don't see why we couldn't do that in Minot. Across the board cut so that you don't have to increase taxes. The other thing is, I'd like to see, I mentioned this to the city manager, I'd like to see a fraud, waste, and abuse hotline for the city so that the citizens can call in and say, hey, I see waste, I see fraud, and report it so it can be corrected. I don't see any accountability in the city for things that go wrong. I've mentioned some to the city manager, and I won't go into it here, but I do believe that we need something like that. I guess my 5 minutes is up.
I'll be happy to just touch on a couple of them. I think first with maybe the fraud hotline idea. Right now there is an accountability access point for filing complaints, and we're sitting up here. So that's normally the first line, and understandably that's something that we're looking into, and I think we've made improvements at least with filing complaints online. And I have no doubt that talking with staff and things like that, that something further can be developed for reaching out, having the community being able to reach out, make suggestions, or file complaints, or file the issues that you had talked about. Regarding the issue of making just the overall cuts, digging into our budget this year, and even last year, we have cut substantially to the point now where if we do make cuts, and I know you and I have had this conversation over a cup of coffee, that we're going deep into the point where now we have to decide on health, safety, and just basic services. And when we talk about like the roads up at the Minot Air Force Base, when they've made cuts, number one thing that I hear from airmen is how Minot's roads, try not to chuckle, are so much better than those that are on the Minot Air Force Base, unless it's the runway. That always comes dead last. And looking at our backlog of what we have on infrastructure and what we've kicked down the road already, we're at the point, I think, with a good many pieces of our infrastructure, if we delay and kick those down the road anymore, we're going to start seeing substantial issues rather than just costly maintenance.
So what you're saying is that if we increase taxes this year, then next year you won't have to? And the year after you won't have to?
Gauging off of our 5-year analysis, and if anybody else does want to jump in, by all means, gauging off our 5-year analysis without any unforeseen major changes, I think we're setting ourselves up for a good period where we're going to be in much financially better shape without having to come back to talk about exactly what we're here tonight. I can never promise anything, and I've said this many times entering into politics, I guess as it is. You can never make an absolute promise. But what we see on our 5-year analysis and setting this budget cycle up puts us in far greater shape for a much longer period of time.
Well, there are a lot of people that are on a fixed income, and they can't pay their taxes now. And there are a lot of people are moving out of Minot. You'll see the houses for sale. They're moving because they can't afford it in many ways. Sales tax, for one. The Magic Fund could be used completely for tax relief instead of, I don't know why we are still we still have the Magic Fund, personally. I think we could use that Magic Fund money to help reduce taxes. And the MADC, which is funded out of the Magic Fund, correct?
Actually, it's a different part of the sales tax revenues.
But it's funded out of tax money.
Out of sales tax.
Okay, and that's about $600,000 a year?
City manager, what was the reduction for MADC this year?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reduction for the operating budget to MADC was about $36,000.
That was the reduction this year, and what
That was the reduction?
That was their reduction.
Okay, what's the total that we give to the MADC?
It's about $324,000 or something to that effect.
Okay. So if we didn't have them, if we redirected the Magic Fund, we wouldn't need MADC, correct?
And I'll jump on this one right away as well. Sacrificing economic development, short-term one-time fixes for sacrificing any potential growth in the future. And we do have a substantial project going on right now, and I think it was outlined by the Minot Daily News not too long ago about what we're working on with intermodal and needing the Magic Fund to be able to get that project up and going. What I talked about NOS and having that manufacturing, that doesn't work without intermodal. And flat out, the governor's office and many others in the state have said that if intermodal doesn't get going somewhere in the state in the next couple of years, it's going to end up somewhere other than Minot. And that is going to be a significant economic difference, giving that up and letting somebody else take that economic driver just to fill a short gap for a year or two.
But don't we have to have people signed up to use intermodal first? Don't we have to have some people that want to use it?
We do. AGT Foods right now is shipping all of their containers up to Winnipeg
Okay.
to the tune of $3 million.
That's one company. How many companies will we have to have before it's useful? My point is that I think we should wait on the Magic Fund, use the Magic Fund for tax reduction or maybe some other infrastructure. But I came before the city council before, and I asked everybody on the council, and some of you were on it, raise your hand if you think we need the Magic Fund, and none of them, including the mayor, raised their hand. So that's just my opinion, one person.
Thank you, Mr.
done.
Ensign. I'll give Mr. Walski an opportunity, and then we'll have somebody else have the opportunity to ask questions.
Mayor Sitma, Mr. Enslin, I appreciate your comments. There's a few things I just want to clarify so that there's clear understanding of what we're talking about in the budget. There is no contribution that is proposed to the Magic Fund itself in this budget. The dollars that previously would have been allocated to the Magic Fund are recommended by our council president to be redirected to flood protection as a priority there. So we're not adding to the Magic Fund at this particular point. We are funding a portion of MADC's operation. They also raise private funds to also fill out the larger portion of a portion of their budget. With regards to your idea to use the Magic Fund to buy down essentially our property tax challenge in this budget, and I'll share these in comments later when we get more into the budget, but I think what you're talking about is precisely the reason we are in this situation, is because we have been hiding the cost of our government from ourselves through practices like using reserves to pay down our cost of everyday government. So that's my opinion on this perspective. I do appreciate your comments, and just wanted to share that for the audience.
I'm just going to have Mr. Turnus as well address one issue that I think that was brought up regarding the home sales. Mr. Turnus.
Mr. Mayor, it's important for people to realize that we're well aware of what goes on in the market. If I could see slide L1 from our, you'll look at L1, and that's an indicator that the top line tells us the gold color is the number of sales that have happened in Minot. They're actually down a little bit. The blue line is the mill levy. As the mill levy has gone up, there's been no noticeable increase in sales. There's been no noticeable increase in listings. And you'll notice on the red line, homes still sell for about, if they're on the market for about 3 to 4 months, they sell. At this point, there is no reason to believe that taxes at this point are causing people to leave town. When that data appears, we will immediately bring it to the council. The other thing I would add is that all people on a fixed income have the ability to get what is called the Senior Citizens Tax Credit, Homestead Credit. I'm not aware of anybody that has been booted out of their home because they can't pay their property tax. Because if it's down to that, they qualify for Homestead Credit, and the state of North Dakota, which is all of us, covers their share of the property tax. We have approximately 350 people on a Homestead Credit discount.
Thank you, Mr. Turnus. Thank you, Mr. Ensign.
Thank you.
If you have more afterwards, we'd certainly welcome you back to the podium. Yes, sir.
Probably shouldn't be here. I just had my hip replaced.
Well, thank you
but
for
I'm
coming.
so passionate about this. My name is Jim Soltis, 1307 15th Street Southwest. I was in business in Minot for 42 years, and I know what it takes to run a business, and I know what it takes to make one profitable. But I know that there are times when we have bad years or we have a bad thing, and we have to adjust for that. We're not able to go to the taxpayers and say, I need some money to make my business work. So I know that the problems we're in right now are mostly none of your fault. I know that. But I think it's our responsibility to do something about it. One thing that I've talked to a couple of you with, and everybody seems to be opposed, is at least maybe 0.5% or some type of a sales tax increase. I've heard some say, well, that'll affect sales maybe. They'll go to Bismarck. I don't believe that. I think anybody that's coming to Minot to shop will still shop here with 0.5%. We can't continue to fund mistakes that have been made and future problems off the back of taxpayers. I propose a sales tax increase of some sort so that everybody that comes in the city, everybody that uses our facilities, not just taxpayers, share in the cost of running our city. So basically, we can't continue to fund future problems off the back of taxpayers. It just is not good business. I couldn't do it in my business, and I don't think you can either. So I would ask that you at least sometime in the near future consider a small sales tax increase to help fund the infrastructure and the things that we're having the taxpayers pay. Okay? That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Soltis. And just one short comment on that from myself. I know that has actually been discussed on a variety of different venues, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be future flood control, knowing what our costs are going to be. But absolutely, you can rest assured that that discussion is happening and will continue to happen in the future. Mr. Alderman Straight, I saw your hand.
Mayor Sitma, maybe Mr. Lakefield might be able to help me, but doesn't the city of Grand Forks currently have a 0.25% sales tax larger than we do? Somebody know that off the top of your? The reason I ask is, Mr. Soltis, we were there, many of us, for League of Cities over the last few days. Grand Forks seems to be booming. I appreciate your comment because I think it's something that we are sitting up here stewing of how we're going to fund these huge obligations moving forward. I think clearly we recognize that a lot of these projects are benefiting elsewhere in the county, and I think that it's incumbent on us within this budget. We hear your concerns, and we are going to hopefully quickly move in a direction where we can talk about that, because I've heard that. It's certainly something I'm aware of, and I appreciate your comments as well, sir.
Well, I think
Thanks
you'd
for being here.
find that 95% of the citizens of Minot would agree to something like that, just to help us move along, not always financed by property owners. Now I need somebody to carry me back.
Thank you, Mr. Soltis. Yes, sir.
Hello, Joe Nolento, 433 Fifth Avenue Northwest. Couple comments. I agree with the gentleman before me, but I would like our council and our body of leadership to maybe get more creative with ideas for our city to generate revenue. We are always turning to taxpayers and putting a heavy burden at the feet of our people, and I just wonder if there aren't more creative ways for us to make money, whether it's a sales tax or it's maybe something more specific, a sugar tax, a tobacco tax, an alcohol tax. I know people aren't going to love that either, but if we are going to consider ways to make more money, I think we should be more creative as a populace. I'd also like to draw attention to a couple things that I found in my research, and that our state aid is down 26.5% over 5 years. And we had the least amount of hub city financing from the state to offset the oil boom population growth. And I know it's not maybe your job here to secure us those funds, but I think that we should all ask ourselves as taxpayers and voters, who are we sending to get us state money, and are we sending the right people? I think that's a relevant question if our state funding is down so heavily over the period of 5 years, and we basically got cast off aside in the hub city financing. I also agreed to a point with Mr. Pittner in his presentation that perhaps we are overfunding the future of flood protection. I do find myself agreeing with him that we could get back down to that 0.5% where we were previously and perhaps extend some of these projects. I guess I would ask the council, has there been any consideration or ideas whatsoever to generate revenue as a city aside from property taxes?
Mr. Lento, I'll take the first piece on this one. Regarding the state aid, we have had discussions with a delegation to actually address that hub city funding, and I think that this legislative session, working collaboratively with our elected officials, we're going to see a turnaround in that. It has to go through the legislature. It certainly is nothing in the bank at this point, but I can assure you that at least myself and several other people within the city are going to be working hard this legislative session to address that. Another piece of it that we can't count on right now is, of course, the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling regarding online sales tax. We're still waiting to see what those type of revenues will come back, if any, to the city. And of course, that is something that we can't certainly count on, but we're going to be watching very closely. A piece of that regarding the economic development, I think Mr. Pittner and many other people out here, and I've said it many times myself, build the base. Build the base of properties and economic development within the city, and that is the best model for creating revenue that otherwise wouldn't be here. And that is a piece of the Magic Fund that I think is important, is helping build that base. Like many of the issues that we're facing up here, trying to get out of from 2011, 12, and 13, bless you, is also addressing within the MADC development area that they had struggled with for a long time. And I think we're starting to see the other side of that light, or at least they're starting to see the other side of that light. And I expect some big things in the next couple of years, if not sooner, from MADC. With that, I'll ask if any other aldermen have more to say on any other ideas. Yes, Alderman Pontargula.
I very much agree with you, and I think there have been things happening, probably not as fast or as high a level as you would like, and I probably would like. I know, for example, at the airport, we've increased our fees dramatically for rental of property and things like that. And to me, it's very obvious that one of the mantras at the airport is make money. Make money for us. And I think that's also the case with the enterprise funds, things like water and sewer. I think we're doing a better job in making sure that those costs are paid for by the users of the services. And that's something that maybe not, very, very publicly known. Building inspection fees and development fees we've increased significantly, almost to the point where I wonder if they might not be a little bit counterproductive. We set a fee, I think was $600 for people who want to apply for a Renaissance Zone application for tax abatement downtown. Probably doesn't, well, not probably, it doesn't cover our expenses. So it's a balancing act between stimulating economic development. I think personally the underlying best solution will be to increase the economic activity and really the wealth of the community. And as long, and I think that's very important, as long as we make sure that wealth is spread around to everyone, it isn't just retained with a certain group of people. So I think in the long run, I think increasing the wealth of the community, and that's what the Magic Fund, I think, really is ultimately about. It's a 5, 10, 20, 25-year investment. So I think we need to keep going with that. We need to be careful to make sure that services are paid for. As for the issue of the people in Bismarck, that's a touchy issue because, quite frankly, I'll be very candid here, we don't want to bite the hand that feeds us. Our state legislators have a lot of power and control. And, we can press them, but beyond a certain point, it's counterproductive. We have constraints with the state, as you pointed out. They've cut out the property tax relief they gave us. And there are other things that make a difference. For example, one of the things that keeps irritating me is that we have a limit from the state on what we can charge for traffic tickets. We can charge, I think, $5 for basic speeding ticket, and it costs something like $23 just for the time of the officer to write the ticket or to punch it into their computer. We can't change that. And the people in Bismarck are saying, protect the local taxpayers, you can't. No, we're losing money. Why should we lose money so the chief's staff can't protect us from people speeding and running over our kids or causing accidents? That's insane. So there are home rule city issues like that, and there are constraints that we have from the state government in terms of what we can do. And I very strongly agree with you. We need to be more careful about who we send to Bismarck. But for those of us here on the council, for me in particular, it's a very touchy issue, and I've made the commitment to generally stay out of partisan politics. And unfortunately, at the Bismarck level, it's partisan. And we have to educate, and I think the city staff, particularly Mr. Barry and the mayor, have done an excellent job in sharing with them our needs. But it is kind of a touchy situation. So I want to assure you we've done a lot to try to plug some of the small holes, to try to make things self-supporting, self-sustaining. And I think we really do need to be looking at, like you say, a more balanced picture in terms of sales tax, and like Mr. Solstice said. Ultimately, in the long run, I think we've achieved all the efficiencies we can. It's looking at spreading the burden around in different fashions and building the economic growth and the wealth of the community. That's going to be the long-term solution. So I agree with you, but I just wanted to point out that we've been doing a lot, and there are some practical constraints.
Oh, I don't doubt you guys are working hard at this. I understand that, and I am personally a fan of the Magic Fund, just in general.
One last thing, Mr. Lanto, and I know we've talked about more sales tax, but I have to put the plug in. We can add sales tax all we want, but if we're not buying local, it's still not generating revenue. So we have to, if we're going to make a commitment down the road, even if we do, even if we do, that we still have to buy local to have that impact. We still don't know what the U.S. Supreme Court ruling is going to have, but when you buy local, and we've heard it before, we've heard it in the newspaper, the radio, from person to person, it affects business locally, it affects revenue not only to the city, but then it affects property taxes. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. One comment to Mr. Lanto's ideas as far as like a sugar tax, alcohol tax, tobacco tax. I don't know. And I think that's the problem with this council is that we don't know. Knowledge is power, and to kind of piggyback off Mr. Soltis, as a business owner, you got to spend money to make money. That's something that I'd love to see our city do. Something I think we've come a long way in is every decision that we make, we try to make it based in fact, not what do we think is going to happen or what do we hope happens, but what is happening. I'd love to see the city consider the idea of a financial analyst. For a long time, we had people wearing many hats and not able to maybe accommodate all these different areas. Someone that can give us these facts. That's why our decisions can be made somewhat easier, I think, currently, is because of the facts that were being given from our department heads, the transparency that we're seeing as a council. So I'm open to those ideas. I really am. Some of those general specific. I don't necessarily like the idea off the top of my head of a flat-out sales tax, but some of the unique ideas on how to make money. We have to spend and we have to invest in these people in order to have these the information and able to make these decisions. So I appreciate your comments.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Sima. Mr. Lanto, I did want to say that my 2 years of sitting up here, I'm going to commend Mr. Barry in particular, because I think this is going to be the first year that we are going to pin down, probably next week at Committee of the Whole, start some legislative priorities that we can then use to address our legislative delegation, our special advisor, Mr. Shane Gettle, and I think that is a tremendous benefit for us. I hope that many of us will be down spending more time in Bismarck talking about the things that matter the most. And I will say one thing that I really would like to see is how we can turn around and go back to the businesses in this community and say, what do you need? I think that's a role within MADC that what do you need to grow? What do you need to expand? What can we do to better support you? I think many people would feel better about the Magic Fund, the use, if they saw it more tangibly kind of every day with something to that effect. But as we've been told before, our population is 36 years old and getting younger in this community. I'm clearly aware that our kindergarten population is large, but I think this conversation is what has to happen in a manner where we're getting creative, we're talking, and we're sharing ideas, because that's the only way we can start to build a little bit of trust back. I recognize there's a lot of animosity in the audience tonight, but those are things that we have to be responsive to you, but we have to turn around and move on some of these ideas quickly, because I don't want to see anybody leave here. That's clearly not our goal. So,
thank you, Alderman Straight.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Lanto.
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, yes.
I have
Sorry.
some information on sales tax rates, seeing how Alderman Straight asked. Grand Forks is currently at 7.25%, compared to Minot's 7.5% rate. There are a number of cities that have 7.5% rates, as well as Williston at 8%, and a number of cities at 7% as well.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Yes, sir, your name and address.
My name is Brad Magnuson, 234 14th Avenue Southeast. And I just wanted to touch on the parking garages real quick, if I may. With the advances in technology and electric cars, it's important for electric car drivers to be able to have the ability to charge their cars and at the same time be able to be in downtown to do shopping and have somewhere to eat and whatever else they're doing downtown. And by placing these charging stations around the downtown area, you're giving them not only the space to charge their vehicles, but they'll have the opportunity to come into downtown and be able to shop and to eat and whatever else. So I'm asking that the city council consider that as maybe something that can be done with the parking garages, like install charging stations within the parking garages.
Mr. Magnuson, I suppose if there is one benefit to this project taking as long as it has, we might be able to get the DOT and some other folks to help us address that down the road before they're finished.
Okay, well, I'm also the chairman of the Renewable Energy Caucus, so I can look into, some dollar figures and everything as far as getting that set up, so I can do that for you.
That would be fantastic. Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Magnuson? Thank you, sir. Alderman Pittner.
I just want to maybe voice. Thank you for coming up and expressing those ideas, because that's a prime example of what we need as a community is to come together and get through these tough times and bring ideas to the table, because I never thought of that. And obviously the way the technology is going and our future is going, that will be a need at some point, whether we think it's close or not. But thank you. Thank you for your ideas. And again, I encourage people in the community to come with these ideas and provide insight to things that we obviously don't think about or can't think about, or we don't have all the answers. So thank you.
Yes, my name is Robert Hodge. I live at 3012 8th Street Northwest. A couple of questions, obviously, with the property tax issue we have. Obviously, collectively, I know mine, what y'all are proposing an 18.5% increase. Last year, mine went up over 15. To me, an over 30% tax increase for any resident in a 2-year time span is, to me, a little unreasonable to ask for. I know maybe we should take a step back. I know we have a lot of projects going on between the buyout stuff and the wall projects, parking garages, the bridges. Maybe we need to take a step back and maybe not try to do everything at once. I mean,
it's, believe it or not, Mr. Hodge, it's a very common response that I've had, and I'm sure some of the other aldermen have had in this point. Many of these are surrounding a lot of federal dollars, and there is local match to that. And to the point, the local matches come from our sales tax revenues, for instance, with flood control, and for instance, with NAWS. And for the longest time, as Mr. Walsky, or Alderman Walsky had pointed out, we've subsidized our own property taxes through those sales tax revenues. And it's forced the city over the last couple of years to analyze a lot of the projects, and we have seen substantial cuts as I've said before. I can tell you this, that many of these projects many projects have been delayed, whether it's street improvements or other ones. What I think I fear, and what a lot of other folks fear, is kind of the knowns if we delay flood control. This I do know, that in 2020, the National Flood Insurance maps are going to be changing for the Mouse River Basin, the Souris River Valley. And that is going to mean increases at a minimum of 12, or a maximum for 12% for the first 2 years, and a maximum of 18% every year after that. And it doesn't take long when you start compounding flood insurance to watch those expenses go well beyond what any tax increase that we're seeing from these 2 years of corrections. That's my biggest issue with flood control, is we have to get this done. Otherwise, we face a completely separate peril that we have no control over whatsoever. This is all through the National Flood Insurance Program that FEMA controls. So that is paramount. With NAWS, this commitment was made before I was born.
Okay.
And it is something that is vital, because as a growing community, we saw last summer when we went into water restrictions, we have our limitations on what we have for capacity for water. That also limits us economically. And with that, I'm confident within these next 2 years that we've made our corrections, and that using these analysis, that we have a lot better picture of what's coming ahead. To my knowledge, I don't know if our city has ever drawn a 5-year analysis for budgeting or beyond. And our work now is going beyond, so that we can start working long-term for what our flood control costs are. NAWS, believe it or not, is, I think in the big picture, a temporary cost, because once we get the next facets built and put together over the next 5 years, we're gonna see those revenues be able to be diverted either back to flood control or infrastructure once that's paid for. This isn't a forever cost either.
But same as some of the other gentlemen mentioned, I've never seen property taxes go down.
If we can find a way down the road, once we make these course corrections, again, any politician that promises anything, be wary.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Turnus.
There's a lot of people that forget that back in 2012 and 2013, when the mill levy was cut, almost 30 mills, their city taxes did go down a lot. And then the state legislature started providing 12% of all our property taxes. And so the average person saw a decrease of between $400 or $500 in their property taxes in that 2012, 2013 year. And I'd be happy to look that up for anybody after the meeting.
Yes, sir, but also last year, on top of my 15% increase in Minot taxes, I lost that 12% of state funding.
You and everybody else.
Absolutely, on top of an additional 18% you're proposing now.
Mr. City Manager, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to add to what Mr. Turnus had said. This city has had a long history of lowering the mill levy rate, at least back to 2005. In fact, the mill levy rate back in 2005 was well above, more than 20 points above what it is today.
You're absolutely right.
We've had a long history of reductions in mill levies, and just as Mr. Turnus said, there's been a massive reduction other than what would have been in place with regard to tax savings for residents. And it's unfortunate because that's just not sustainable in the continuing budgets going forward. So I do apologize. We are, no one's really happy about this at all, but with the reductions that have already been mentioned in state subsidies to the city, with the $8 million that we've cut out of the budget in the last 3 years from the operating budget, and in addition to the $14 million we lost in sales tax revenues in the last 3 years combined, it's not sustainable, where we would have to drastically cut services in order to do what you're requesting.
So I guess my question is, you're talking about the mill ratio back in 2005. I sat down with some of the tax assessors earlier this year.
Okay.
I believe it was maybe it was 07 or 08. It was almost 400. But you got to compare apples to apples. My house now is valued at $300,000. Back then you could have bought for $180. Mm-hmm. So when you're comparing a higher mill factor for a lower dollar value, still cheaper.
And that's one of the, I think, more substantial battles that we've had, maybe compared to other areas of the state outside of Williston and Watford City, is that valuation driven by energy impact. And it comes back to that conversation of Hub City funding. Alderman Wolski, I saw your hand up for a moment.
I appreciate your comments, Mr. Hodge, and I think there's an important point that you bring out, and I know that a lot of people are feeling exactly what you're feeling, which is that yes, for that period we were reducing our mill rate, but when it was balanced against rising property values, it wasn't a reduction in taxes. I realize that many people in town didn't feel a substantial reduction, even though the mill rate did drop. But the other thing I think it's important for everybody to keep in mind is our costs have been going up that entire time, this entire period. The reality that we're going to see taxes go down on an annual basis, it might be an unreasonable expectation because everything goes up. This is just the way the world works, right? So I just wanted to share that and enter that into the conversation.
City Manager Barry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to point out, Alderman Wolski is correct. Valuations did counter the mill levy reductions. That is true. But to put it into a bit of perspective for you, in 2006, our mill levy rate was 122.7 mills. The average home assessment, or value, I should say, was about $97,000, and the average City of Minot tax bill, this is the City of Minot only portion, was $534.65. In 2016, the number of mills went down by almost 50 between the comparison of 2006 to 77.8 mills. There was a per home assessment on the average home value of $190,000 of $665.27. So what that means is between 2006 and 2016, home values more than doubled, and the number of mills was reduced by 50 points, but yet the 10-year change only resulted in an increase in Minot property taxes of $130.62, or essentially $13 a year over the 10-year period. So the point that I want to make here is that, just as what was said by one of our council members earlier, we have been kidding ourselves about the cost of government. We've been hiding that from the citizens. The reality is that the increase in Minot property taxes between 2006 and 2016 was about 10% over that entire period. Yet the cost of living, the CPI, was double that. So we were not even keeping pace with the cost of inflation, all along losing ground and losing the value of our dollars the whole way. And I think that's what many people in our community just aren't understanding. We are undoing a long history here, and it is painful, and I acknowledge that, and I wish it was different. It's not what I think any of us expected to walk into.
One final point too, Mr. Hodge, that while we're talking about a look back, if we take a look at the city size, and I don't have it pulled up here, and I'm not just going to grab it here quickly off the top of my head, but the city size itself from about 2007 to 2017-18 grew by 86%. I'm talking square miles, 86%. And that required, yes, more police officers, more road graders, just to keep up with those basic services. And a lot of that was buried within those sales tax revenues rather than on property tax. And as those went down, the sales tax revenues declined. And it passed that threshold of being able to support what was needed by a growing community, not excess, but what the base was needed for fire protection and for police officers and basic road. And we saw the last couple of, in last month's report, that we weren't even keeping pace with road maintenance, is that we hit that threshold where we could no longer sustain that through our sales tax revenues. So now, absolutely, this is kind of that opening the book to everything for what it really is, and making what we hope is this last correction to get us on a very sustainable course. Any further questions or comments? Alderman Pontegulo.
Just a historical perspective, I think I'm on this dais the longest, or started earliest in 1998. When I was first on the council, the buzzword, the theme of every budget was, we have reduced the mill levy by X. It wasn't, we have given services. It wasn't, these are our goals, we're working to meet them. It wasn't asking about our goals. That was the obsession, in my opinion. And I'm a clinical psychologist, so you'll forgive me for using that diagnostic term. Our obsession was keeping the mill levy down and lowering it. And that was seen as progress, and that was seen as an accomplishment. And that catches up with you eventually. I'd like to have the bigger discussions like we're starting to have about investing in the future. You know, how do we compensate our staff? You know, what's the relative value of flood control versus these other things? But what's important that I think people understand is we've been preoccupied for so long with lowering that levy. And as Tom said, as our city manager said, if in the past 10 years the cost of living goes up 20% and our net taxes go up 10%, we're not even keeping pace. That's just not realistic. And what I'm proud of now is that finally we have a council, I think to a person, that's being much more candid, and a city administration that is really educating the public about what the reality is. And tonight's hearing is an example of that. But what is important, too, that people understand is this is very different from the way it was 10, 20 years ago. We were focused, we were fixated on keeping that property tax mill levy down. And there's a cost to that. It costs money to run government. And you just can't keep hiding that. And you know, I'm satisfied when I look at the kinds of reductions that our department managers have made with the pressure that Mr. Barry has put on them with this mayor and the previous mayor and this council president, the previous one, and all of us here. I think we've cut about as much as we can, and I think we're looking at creative alternatives, and I'm very pleased to have the input that we have. But there is a certain economic reality here. If your costs go up 20% and your income goes up 10% and you keep cutting, there's just no way around it.
So you're telling me you believe a 30% property and tax increase for your average homeowner in 2 years is reasonable?
I would answer that it's the city's portion. The city's portion of an overall tax bill is what, 32%? It's not even a third yet. It used to be until last year 27%. So when the overall bill goes up, you know, it's just our 27 cents that go up to 18% or whatever. And Mr. Barry, I'm sure, has the numbers better than I do.
And Mr. Hodge, I'll weigh in on this. No, it's not reasonable. We're outlining what got us here, and to make that correction, the one facet that I think any community has to offset this, because otherwise, if you just continue to grow and the city grows and the city staff grows and all the expenses grow, that just leads to perpetual increase. The fastest way to offset that is what we've talked about, is growing the base. Filling in what's inside of the city and adding more revenue through property tax for new construction or higher value construction, higher value reinvestment within the community. That's the best way to offset that. And that has to be, and I know it's my mission, and I know it's a lot of other folks' mission to focus on that, because that is a way to offset that, to mitigate those costs, to either slow them down or stop them entirely for a period of time until you have completely filled in all of the gaps. And I don't know of any community, even Fargo, has reached that level. I do want to bring up one slide B3, and I think this is a good representation of the staffing ratios comparative to other cities, and I wanted to touch on this one, number 3 there, Derek. And this one is talking about the number of employees that we have, one ahead, unless the computer's froze. This is talking about the number of full-time employees that we have within the city compared to even the other folks in western North Dakota going through this oil boom, the energy impact. When we talk about lean, with the cuts that we've made and the difficulty we have in filling positions, this is significant, especially when you take a look at the fire and police portion of that. When we talk about making further cuts, the most substantial cut that we could make is in staff at this point to make any kind of real impact. And we're on a threshold of not being able to provide essential services within many of these departments to have any kind of substantial impact to our budget now. It's far from reasonable to say 30% in 2 years, but I think what we have here in front of us is that course correction that stops the trend.
All right, I appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lakefield.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to take an opportunity to correct a little bit of the record. We've had a couple of speakers that have asserted that they have never seen a decrease in their property taxes. And we've already talked a little bit about the decrease in the rate. And Derek, if you can put up slide F4, this is just a visual representation of what Mr. Berry was referring to earlier with the decrease in the mill rate. In addition to that, what Mr. Turnus had spoke about with the state buying down property taxes 12% happened in that same time frame after the city had reduced their mill rate. In addition, the state of North Dakota had provided additional funding to fund schools that also had a significant impact in the total mill rate for residents of the city. So there were a number of factors that came into play during that time frame. They are correct. During that time frame, property values were essentially on the increase, but we're also in an extreme period of inflation in this part of the country as well. So the cost of doing business was increasing significantly, and competition for resources was tremendous. So that was something that the city was thrown into, and to combat that, they offset some of those increased costs with the use of sales tax to subsidize property taxes. And if Derek will bring up slide G6, this correlates with the decrease in property taxes with the increased collections in sales taxes. And now the inverse of that has been happening with the decline of the activity in the western part of the state. So when those sales tax revenues are decreasing, the first attempt to offset that or bring that back into balance was to cut costs and use reserves to balance the budget. But that is money that is only there. You can only drain the savings account so far, and then something else has to happen. And that's kind of where we found ourselves now. We have to use that additional revenue sources, which in this case is property taxes. One other thing I would like to point out as well, and Mr. Mayor, you already alluded to this, there's 3 components to how much money we raise with property taxes. We have the value and we have the rate. So as the value goes down, the rate has to increase to raise the same number of dollars. So some of the speakers have already talked about, they don't think that we should raise that rate, we should keep it the same. If that's our course of action, then our best option to raise the additional money is to increase the base. So these things are so interdependent. If we are to reduce the money we're sending to economic development, we're cutting short our opportunity to increase our base and reducing the ability to grow that, and puts additional pressure on the rate. So these things are so interrelated, even though it seems like it's a real short-term, easy fix, there are consequences that will happen in the future. And we just wanted to point that out. One last thing, and I hate to get on a rant here. Cutting the different projects. That is something we have looked at over and over and over again. I'm relatively new to the city. There's a number of these projects that I'm not emotionally tied to. We've asked these questions, but we have to be smart in how we plan these projects. An example, the 83 bypass project, we know the flood project is going to come through there. There were improvements that needed to be done with the road right-of-way and the bridge to facilitate the flood project. It doesn't make sense to build the flood project and then come back and tear the road out and redo that part of the work that you just completed. So they're trying to phase this in and work smart and hopefully save money in this process by coordinating these different projects to get them completed for the least impact to the budget possible. I've asked Director Jonassen questions, and particularly about the NAS. I had the opportunity to tour the water plant when Andrea Travnicek was in town from the federal government. And you look at that technology, some of it dates back to the 50s and 60s. It's been improved and remodeled and brought up to speed and increased in capacity. There's a project going on with the water plant right now related to NAS. It's going to increase the capacity of the water treatment plant. So I asked the question, so once we get that increased capacity, we're set. Well, no, because now the choking point is in the raw water supply to the water treatment plant and the wells that can supply the water. So even though we'll have the capacity to treat the water, we don't have the long-term supply to the water. And one of the first questions that comes when economic development comes to town is, I need X million gallons of water a day, and I need that every single day. And we have to have that capacity. We have to have that ability to bring that economic development to town, which will grow the base and relieve some of the pressure on the existing tax base that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield.
Ernie Medallan, 912 18th Avenue Southwest. Mr. Mayor, City Manager, Councilman, and City staff. I have some comments. Some of them are from a citizen's standpoint as to how the city spends money, and I'll try and illustrate that by examples. And then some suggestions or things that I think should be looked at as far as the city budget. And Mr. Chairman, if I run over the 5 minutes, please tell me and I'll sit down. The city budget is a complex and hard for the citizens to follow. There's 140 pages on the computer. General fund, enterprise funds, salary plan has 90 grades, position levels, 17 steps relating to years of employment. The budget's on the computer, which may be a problem for some of the older senior citizens to follow. Many of the younger working age people, both parents are working, so it's tough for them to follow and be expected to get to meetings and keep up with it. There's also the sales tax, the federal funding, the grants, money back and forth between different projects and different parts of the budget, the mills, the taxable valuations, and so on. But the basic issue comes down to the citizens, what is the tax dollar that comes out on my bill? Because of this complexity, all of us, we really depend on our aldermen to study this, get informed, and make decisions which take care of the city needs and also show some respect and look out for the people who pay the bills, the citizens of Minot, many who are retired and on fixed incomes. There have been a lot of information on the loss of income, but I have heard very little information or discussion on the spending of the city budget. I attended all of the candidate forums for alderman last spring when I heard comments like support of a zero-based budget, concern for the city taxes, we have to keep the taxes down. Now all of a sudden, I don't hear any of that. There was one alderman that had the courage at a meeting not too long ago to say, I hate to even bring it up, but there is the dreaded word cuts, and everybody else kind of glared at him, and nothing more was said about it. One of the things that presents a problem, I think, for the citizens is what I call a transparency in the budget. And I'm going to talk about the parking ramps from a different angle than what you've already heard. In the parking ramps, there's an item for $1,500,000, and it says for parking, ramp, roof, and drainage systems under capital purchases. When we checked on this, we were told that only about $900,000 is for the parking ramp roof repair and maintenance. The other $600,000 was for legal fees on court cases and some expected costs. Well, you know, is this transparency in a budget? I mean, to put that under capital purchases? Then I also, to follow up on that, I checked, and under the city attorney budget, there's budget for 3.5 regular employees and another line item that says contracts, legal assistance, legal contracts, and technical advice, $320,000, which is up from $192,000 in 2017. Now, if I add that together, that's almost $1 million, but part of it's kind of what I call hidden under the capital purchase for the ramps. So, you know, I have to wonder about that type of thing. I'd like to also comment on the concept of information that's put out to the public, that this is only a 6% increase in the total tax bill. The city is dealing with the city budget, and I don't feel it's very fair or transparent to put out this information, which is really riding on the back and averaging out the taxes for the county, school, park board, and so on. Now, these entities had little or no increase at all. They bit the bullet, and they're also dealing with flood control issues and those types of matters. And so then the city puts out information that, well, it's only 6%, 6.6 was the first information that came out. I just don't feel that's fair. It's not transparent, and it's not reporting properly. We should be dealing with the city tax. The consolidated tax will take care of itself when they put it all together. Last year, the city budget was advertised as a bare bones budget. Yet when asked by a couple of aldermen, the city came up with approximately $500,000 that could be cut out of the budget to maintain the salary plan. And that was all done in 1 week between the first reading and the second reading. So was it really a bare bones budget? Is it a bare bones budget this year? The salary increase and benefit package is a 15.45% increase, an increase of $2,187,466. Everyone is entitled to a decent salary, but in these times, can we really afford this, all of this? There's been a lot of discussion on loss, retention of employees. However, it could not be verified that salary or benefits are the primary reason for employees leaving, and that's based on a question that was asked by one of the aldermen at the meeting a week ago on the question and answers. The benefit package adds almost $1 million to the budget, with some of the new benefits not priced out. The bulk of that is the health insurance program, the increase in the payments. The information I got was that there was 279 employees are getting a 2.5% salary increase or less. 31 employees are getting a 5% increase in salary. The rest of the employees are getting a 7.5% increase in salary. And that information came from Lisa. Lisa was very helpful. I copied this down on a telephone call, so I hope it all is correct. But if not, I stand corrected. But I think that was, I copied it down correctly, and I thank her for that information. She was very helpful. I would only hope that the higher increases, the 7.5%, is getting to the people or the personnel which is in the first responder category staff, if that is, in fact, the reason for people leaving, which I don't know if that's been verified or not. But anyway, I'd like to be sure that that money goes to there and not somewhere else, because I feel that definitely should have first preference. Anyhow, I feel that this benefit package, the salary and benefit package, is probably pretty good when you look at a community like Minot. I don't think there's anyone in the private sector that has anything close to that. It may be, and I feel it's quite comparable to the governmental and other agencies in the city. The information is constantly put on for citizens to attend meetings, ask questions. And then what happens when you do this? I attended or was invited by letter to attend a meeting regarding budget information recently. At one point, I tried to make a point as to how the public sees the city spending money. This is a public perception. I mentioned the city buying 320 acres of land for landfill expansion for $4 million, land that had been appraised for $1.27 billion. I was shot down by a city employee who said that there was no money spent on that deal that would affect the city finances or budget. He said it was all from grants, trusts, and CDB block grants. I didn't want to make a public case as I did not have information with me. However, here is the complete information from that. And this comes from the Finance and Improvement Committee meeting on March 28, 2017. The preliminary information to the council. I'm sure you've all seen it. Maybe some of you weren't on the council at that time. It talks about the city staff recommending this. Agreement has been made with the owner to purchase 317.48 acres of land for $4 million. Then it goes on, some agreed on terms of that purchase include no transfer of mineral rights, prorated payment of taxes, and the owner doesn't want surplus land sold off for development. Financial impact. Funding for this was budgeted in the 2017 landfill budget to include CDBG grants, North Dakota Land Trust grant, and then it says bonding and cash reserves. So evidently, cash reserves and bonding have no effect on city budget or finances based on that information. That was what I say, kind of I was shot down because I even asked the information at a meeting. The other way to put people down who ask questions is to write articles in the paper indicating a person pointing a bony finger at the council, referring, and the reference to this is, you know, that you're a witch on a witch hunt. Well, I hope that that's not put me in a category. I have kind of fat fingers, so I think that I should be excused from that. Or the other way is to be referred to in the newspaper as a disgruntled taxpayer who doesn't want to pay taxes. When that type of thing happens, it does not do much for encouraging people to attend meetings or ask questions. Most people are smarter than me and do not show up or expose themselves to this type of thing. Then we get called apathetic and show a lack of interest. The city, going back to the taxes, my city tax bill increased last year 27% on my house property. This year, on the projected budget, 21.55%. So that's a 48.5% increase in my taxes in 2 years. My valuation stayed exactly the same. And I realize the figures that were shown on the chart with the dip and all that, but the taxpayers were not responsible for that. There were many things involved in that. It wasn't only the sales tax being dropped, being cut back, or the receipts from it, but there was also that 12% state that was included in there. The taxpayers didn't vote on that. It was something that was granted and then it was taken away. With that, the taxpayers voted on taking some of that sales tax money and putting it into the facilities and that type of thing. So those were things that, nothing that we did. And my question is, I don't disagree with the figures there, but why does this all have to be made up in 2 years? Why couldn't it be balanced out a little bit, along with a good look at some of the spending things that I mentioned here, and that just in a nutshell? There's no way that I can go through and look at all of that.
Mr. Madallen, we're coming up on 15 minutes already on this, and we have a lot of questions to answer.
Okay.
First, I want to talk.
I'll stop then. I hope your answers
we may
are
have some
restricted
questions
5
for you
minutes
as
too.
well. The first, and I'll look to some of the aldermen because there was quite a few questions in here. The first I think we have to address is the 18% versus 6%. I'll use any number of phone calls I took immediately when we initially kicked out the projections of city portion 18%. And the average person that read that, because we weren't pushing the overall increase then, the combined tax increase, everyone that I took that phone call from, and I think the majority of people that took the headline or saw the blast off of their social media page was city taking an 18%, your 18% is going up next year. So they immediately went to last year's tax bill and they added 18%. I think we've done a good job of transparently telling them that the city's portion is 18%. Here's what we know on the whole picture, the same way we did many, many years ago when I stood behind a camera over here and the city was taking a 0, but their taxes were going up at that time because of school. And the entire council sat up here of 14 people plus a mayor and said, well, that's not our increase, but it didn't stop the podium, folks, because it was not understood. And I think that was the part that was critical for the staff and the aldermen to try to give a holistic understanding. We have gone, I think, beyond, above and beyond to get that information on YouTube, on all of the different social media. And I know not everybody's on social media. We've also gone out to the news folks to try to help this out. And I really hope that it doesn't appear that anybody is aggressively answering any of these, but this is one part that's been very, very difficult over the number of years to help people understand the different facets of the different taxation that makes up their entire tax bill.
But it has been put out in some of the printed material, 6.6% increase on the tax bill. That, in fact, it was on one of the video presentations. So that's what I'm talking.
As an overall increase.
Yes, and I don't feel that should be done because that's riding on the backs of the other entities that had no tax. It's an average.
Absolutely it is, and I truly believe that folks should have the ability to see what their total tax bill is right along with the city's portion.
Okay.
Because believe it or not, not everybody follows the city council to a T or committee of the whole to understand what their tax bill is. Do any of the other aldermen have anything before I go into any of my other points here? I think I want to talk about the salary increase. And I'm going to look to the city manager here specifically because this is one that did bite us last year. And I own that during the campaign. I own that leading up to this with directing, finding cuts within our budget to push to the benefits package for the city employees, simply because comparatively to every other municipality within North Dakota, and I may be off by maybe one, we're substantially far under the threshold of being competitive. First and foremost, dating back to I want to say it was 83 or 86, when the city of Minot opted out of Social Security. And instead of having employees pay into Social Security, and instead of having the city match that Social Security, that was opted out. So city employees don't pay into Social Security, and the city doesn't pay that portion either, and saves that into the budget. And that happened all the way through the remainder of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and that is a substantial loss to recruitment effort to every potential city employee, because they know their only retirement is on a self-funded 401k. We don't even have a pension any longer. That is underfunded by $6.5 million. And that is still within our budget this year on trying to make up that balance. We have a number of different department head positions and a number of employment pieces throughout our entire city staff that we can't fill right now, because we're struggling just to find people to come and work based on what we've had in the past for benefits and what we're struggling with to catch up. I thought it was a fair piece to find cuts within our budget and redirect that towards buying up some of our health care to substantially, well, in a small portion, try to make up some ground aside from offering ND PERS as a state pension and buying into that program as a benefit as well. I'm going to look to Mr. Barry as far as the rest of the comparatives on the benefits for the cities.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important for the community to understand with these numbers, we're reinforcing exactly your sentiments. Just a couple quick things. The family plan that your public servants subscribe to in the city of Minot costs $2,500 more than the next benchmark city per year. $3,000, so $2,500 more than Grand Forks, over $3,000 more than Fargo, and just to point this out, the cities of Bismarck, the county of Ward, the state of North Dakota, Minot State University, all have 100% paid premiums fully for health care. So we're well behind that. Additionally, you mentioned, Mr. Medallan, that the cost of the employment improvement plan that we've put together was over $1 million. That's just simply not the case. In fact, cost, I want to get it for you here, is $567,000, 837. So I wanted to just correct that statement. I also want to mention that last year, our turnover rate was right around 10% when we got to this time in the budget. When we got to the end, when the salaries were cut in half by the employees, we saw our turnover rate surge from about 10% to almost 15%. That savings of $420,000 cost the citizens in turnover costs $856,546 just in the last quarter of the year. That means with this plan to improve the employee benefits, if we can save just 10 jobs for the year, just 10, we will have effectively reduced our turnover rate by 2.3%, and this benefit improvement will more than pay for itself. So I just want to make that very clear. Our turnover rate currently is 14.9% inside the city.
What page are you coming from? Because the benefit package, I took that off one of the pages in the plan, and you said I was wrong, and I guess I have to challenge that.
Okay.
But I took the figures right out of the budget.
Well, let's see what, do you have the page number? And
I don't have it here.
Let's turn to our finance director here, Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, I believe it's a couple of different factors. Part of that number in the total cost of the benefit package includes the annual increase from the providers. So the annual increase in the cost for existing employees, and then there's a component that is the additional benefits. So they're all together, it's not segregated out in the budget. Okay, so I think what Mr. Medallan is looking at is the total increase in cost, and a portion of that cost we would have incurred just due to the annual rate increases, and the remainder is due to the change in the benefit package.
So that would make perfect sense, Mr. Medallan, because the increase in the benefit portion that's being added in the budget is not that full amount.
Okay.
I did want to address one other area, and I'll have to maybe punt on the landfill. I do remember the meeting. I don't remember all the details on it, and I'd have to go back in there. I do know that we got substantial grants from the state of North Dakota for that land, but I'll have to go back to some of those details. In terms of the legal fees, though, every city council meeting we have a report from our attorney, and And thankfully, we've made the transition into just, here's what's been going on over the last, month, to the laundry list of litigation that the city is currently in. And some of those is the city being, sued, or in the case of the parking garages, we filed that suit for separation, and then there was a countersuit. And anytime that the NDRF, North Dakota Insurance Reserve Fund, is involved, it doesn't always cover all of the costs for those suits. And I think looking back at the long list of different litigations that the city has been involved in, and I'm not saying right, wrong, or otherwise, but there is a lot of litigation that has come to the city or after the citizens, after the taxpayers, because it is not a free-for-all when it comes to filing those suits. I just want to make one more point. It is suing the citizens because that's who ends up paying in the end. And to say each and every one of them, I can't account for those dollars, but that really is what the compounded issue is. Mr. Madolin.
Yeah, my comment was relative to, should that be listed in with capital purchases?
If I may, and I may have to look at our finance director, because it is going through the parking ramp specific to that separation. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Madolin, the items listed in the capital portion of the budget are just the capital improvements to the parking ramps. Again, that is, at this point, a best guess based on what we know now and what we anticipate needs to be done. Currently, there's a study being undertaken by a structural engineer to evaluate the best course of action for that. But right now, that is the best estimate. The potential legal costs are included in the city attorney's budget in the contract line item that Mr. Madolin pointed out earlier with the increase. And a portion of those costs that increase is for a variety of different reasons. It's a legislative year. We have a consultant that's on board that we have retained to assist with legislative activities. And because it's a legislative year, that contract amount goes up. In addition, we have anticipated costs in there for a number of litigation issues that the city is involved with. Some of those costs are being paid by grant dollars, which is the case with the parking ramps. A portion of that is being paid with federal funding. A portion of it is being paid by NDRF, like you alluded to, and then there's always a portion that is the responsibility of the city should we need to take additional actions. The additional cost included with the city attorney's budget for that increase is the addition of a contract attorney to handle municipal court prosecutions. And we had looked at adding an additional staff in the city attorney's budget last year and cut that item out of there. With the number of contracts and the items that we're entering into on a daily basis, it's increasing the workload. Obviously, these legal agreements become more and more complex as time goes on, and obviously we feel it's in the city's best interest to have the attorneys involved in the crafting and review of these documents up front. And when we analyzed how we would approach that, it made sense and was probably the most cost effective to contract out some of the prosecution duties for municipal court because we don't have any space to add an additional attorney in City Hall. So if we were to hire a staff member, we have no place to put them. So because we're so constrained by space, the thought was that that was something that we could parcel out, and it made sense that we could contract to do that and hopefully minimize the impact to get that work done.
The one last point, Mr. Madolin, and thank you for bringing it up. Last year when we did have the request to cut the additional $500,000, that immediately goes to what were we going to delay and kick down the road. This year, in terms of can we mitigate down the road, because that substantial change with NAWS, it would mean bonding. It means borrowing dollars and adding to debt services and costing us more. We talked about this, I think, in April, May, June, and July through all the campaigning processes and different discussions. And the consensus, I think everyone, not everyone, the majority of people that were upset after last year's increase was like a Band-Aid, rip it off and get it over with, because if we delay this year, it means coming back to the well not only next year, but depending on how much we kick down the road, the year after that. And I think what the goal is here is to get on a sustainable course that we don't have to come back to the taxpayers again and again and again for a good number of years. And that's exactly what I saw last year with that delay, whether it's road improvements, whether it's putting off some of those important projects that we're tied into. And as I've kind of stated before, is we've run out of road, or it's falling apart, and we got to fix it.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
I'd like
Lisa.
to make some clarification just on some of the numbers for Mr. Madolin. Derek, could you put up slide E1, just to give some clarity on the pay plan and how our pay plan is actually done? Our pay plan is composed of two different aspects. We do a salary survey every year to see if our salary grades are within the right range. And then also our individuals are given an increase based on where they're at in their steps, somewhat similar to what happens for the teachers. This year, the average increase for our individuals is at 2.94%. How that's broken down is 279 of our 406 people, or 69% of our employees, will be getting a 2.5% increase or less. 47 employees are actually probationary and aren't going to be getting an annual increase in January because they haven't met their probation. 127 of our employees, and these are our entry-level individuals, will be getting a 5% increase. Now, when we do a market adjustment, because the salary grades are not comparable to other municipalities, we change our grades for those particular positions. For this year, 60% of the salary adjustment is going to be devoted to police and fire. So that 7.5% that you indicated, those are those positions that you were correct on that. So the majority of that market adjustment is going to be going to those individuals this year. So.
Thank you.
Alderman Straighten, I think we can move along if there's some other folks that have some questions.
I'll try to be quick. Mr. Mayor, thank you. Mr. Madolin, I did want to start off by saying that I'm not getting a pay raise this year. I'm still earning, for you in the audience, we're getting paid $505 a month with no health insurance to be your alderman, so I did want to comment about that. If there was any thought that we were going to be inflating our own salaries, because I was pulled aside last week at the Parker, and I did want to make sure that that was clear. I appreciate Mr. Madolin, and it's probably going to be that you're going to take me out and buy me a cup of coffee next week, and we're going to talk about some of these things. But the transparency in the budget, I think you serving as a former alderman, we can learn a lot from your experience, and I think we need to do that. My greatest fear, and I'll be perfectly honest, Mr. Madolin, I'm with you. I can ill afford an additional property tax increase this year. My family can't afford it. So the conundrum is, you elected me to make tough decisions, right, and lead. And what I've heard, and I see Ms. Balmelman in the back of the room, she railed pretty hard during the election for the mayor, was we need to pay our public servants better. I think we all get it. I understand it. My neighbor is a firefighter. I respect him. I want to do that. I want to pay them. And I want to try to figure out the retention issue in a way where we heard a lot that some of it was on our shoulders from last year. I think it unfortunately got framed out. But I think if this goes through this year, I do want you to know, sir, that I'm going to be looking to Mr. Barry for some continued leadership. And I'm going to be, in particular, I'm going to be saying to city staff, the writing is on the wall. The public expects better customer service. They expect a response that doesn't begin with no. It begins with, yeah, let's figure out how to make it happen. And that matters to me a great deal, especially with the changes that have been taking place. I don't envy Mr. Lakefield or Mr. Barry the situation that they kind of have found themselves in. I don't think any of us are stoked to talk about the parking garages or to figure out how to fund it. But I have to admit that we contributed a sizable amount of money to those. And I'd be really uncomfortable to just let them go back to Mother Nature. That's a tough pill to swallow for me. But I think that this is the process. And the reason why I struggle the most with the budget is the trust that the public has in us to be receptive and to understand that we've been through a lot. Finances are tough. I can't squeeze any more money out of my $505 a month. So we're at a tough spot. But the challenge still is what it is, and that's the greatest heartache for me with this. I would love to phase it in, do a 2-year approach, partly because I feel like I owe it to you, sir, to come back here next year and sit here and take the heat, because we can't. I've heard it loud and clear over the last 6 weeks in particular. We don't have the money to pay, Shannon. I can't pay any more property tax. I've heard that abundantly clear. And so that's my very transparent thought process over the last 6 or 8 weeks. And I appreciate you being here, because I think that your experience, sir, in particular is, I have no idea how I'm going to end my time up here and how I would come to as many meetings as I've seen you at in the last couple of months, sir. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Straight. Thank you, Mr. Madon. If we work our way around here and you still have some more, we'll certainly invite you back up.
Mr. Mayor, quickly, I can add some clarification to the landfill numbers so we can clear that up. In the 2017 budget, Mr. Madallen is correct. There was just under $1 million in cash reserves budgeted, $1.3 million from North Dakota Land Trust, $3 million from CDBG, and $1.74 million from revenue bonds. However, the expected cost in the 2017 budget was also $7 million for the property. So when that cost came in significantly lower than expected, that bonding, the funds from the bonds weren't required, so they didn't take out any debt for that. So it was funded entirely from cash reserves, the Land Trust grant, and CDBG grant dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield.
I got a question for the finance director.
Hold on. For those questions, we'll have you come up to the podium. Just log it and come back up as soon as the next gentleman is done.
Okay. Mr. City Manager, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and staff members, my name is Dean Somerville. I reside at 2803 11th Street Southeast. And much has been said about using mills for comparisons, and I just want to address a couple things, the figures that I have on budgets. For one thing, the article in the paper the other day, in 2011, 107 mills generated $12.7 million. In 2018, 106.65 mills generated 22.6 mills, a difference of about $10 million. So when using mills, if you don't know the valuation of mills, it's really not a good figure to use as far as comparisons. That's my opinion. I have a copy of the budgets since 2010 in dollars. In 2010, I'm going to round it off to millions, $67 million. That was our budget for 2010. 2018, the proposed budget is last year. That's an increase of about $37 million in 1 year. At that rate, you double this budget in 5 years. So as far as the budget, and I know there's a lot of talk that we didn't. So how does that coordinate with trying to, I know you can't do things for 2%, but try to show some relief for taxpayers. At what percent is enough? I'd like to know if you got a percent. In regards to some of the decreases in property taxes, I know several years that I served, there was about an 8–10% increase in valuation annually. And so we did reduce some mills, but only because of the 8–10% increase in valuation. First of all, with just the valuation, you had an 8–10% increase in budget. So is it fair? And we tried to offset it in accordance to people's salaries and budgets. When I campaigned, and so I just want to make that point. In regards to the city only getting 32% of the taxes, that is correct, but was actually about flat. Now, that's 15% from all of the other districts and 34% from the city. So, yeah, the city only is 32%, but their increase is more than double the other entities. In regards to real estate, residential, the increases from 2016 to 2017 on residential, according to the Ward County tax statement, was an increase of 29%. The county was 4%. The park was 3%. There again, 7%, the school was close to neutral. In fact, the school was down that year. And so you had 7% for all three of the others, and you had 29% from the city. This year, the city from 2017 to 2018 has an increase of about 23%, considering comparable valuations. Ward County was at 5%. Ward County, now I understand, has taken another decrease and is flat. And the park is 3%. The school is at 4%. Now, I commend these other entities for keeping single-digit tax increases. And it certainly helps the burden that the city puts on taxpayers as far as their increases, because it does soften the blow some. I attended a focus meeting. In that meeting, it was going through the increases coming up as far as the 5-year projection and things. And anyway, at the end, there was the start of that projection, there was about a $5 million difference, which the city manager felt needed to be made up, and he said he thought he would be around 20 mills. And so I asked him, a 20 mil increase with the increase we had last year, that's an increase of about 45%, 45 to 50%. In the years that I've lived here since '62, and of course, I mean, there might have been something that I don't realize, but I don't remember any kind of increases like this. I don't remember anything in the 20s. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I understand the redirection of some funding, and I understand those. But you know what? There's such a thing as offsets, and I did express that very thing to Mr. Berry. And he said, if you have any ideas, I'd be glad to hear them. And anyway, we did. We submitted a budget decrease to the president. First one was flood control. Assessment of 5.34 mills. The proposed budget suggests that property taxes on Minot taxpayers be levied to pay the portion for flood control project. Therefore, Minot taxpayers would pay most of the cost of the project by sales tax and also pay by a property tax, while the others would benefit from the projects, would pay a very small part of the cost when they visit Minot. The budget proposes that $20 million be borrowed to pay for flood control costs, and that the remaining would go $1,079,000 to be paid by property tax. We offered a solution. Solution, borrow $21 million and eliminate the 5.34 mills. We found out later, this really wasn't stated properly. This was actually a loan that was drawn, and I think it was from, I'm not sure what account. But anyway, it was a loan for over $1 million that went into the general fund. And so that's what the property taxpayers would be paying for on the $1,079,000. Now, we talked about transparency before. Is that a problem? I don't know. It's certainly not what is stated in the budget. Parking ramps, 7.28 mils. The proposed budget uses $1,500,000 of property tax for parking ramp, roof, and drainage systems. This would amount to a level of 7.28 mils. The Magic Fund and federal funds were used to pay for the portion of the construction of the ramps and could be used to bring the structures up to code in place of putting this burden on property tax. Both of these reductions were approved. If both of these reductions were approved, the mill levy increase would be reduced from 22.80 mils to 10.18 mils. Well, sadly to say, they were rejected. We thought that it was a solution that could help the taxpayer, the property taxpayer. And in a memo we got from the president who had accepted this, was that the drainage was actually only about $900,000. The rest were legal fees and ongoing court cases, since we have a limit on the coverage by NDIRF. And if I move down, I will make the use of Magic Fund money part of my president's recommendation, saving a little over 4 mills. Both projects could be good uses of Magic Fund dollars. That was the end of any reduction. I mean, we haven't heard a word about reductions.
Mr. Somerville, are you just about wrapped up here on your questions?
Well, my questions, is there a growth rate that everybody feels comfortable with when you consider the taxpayers' increases and when you figure their increases to balance it off? Is there, and when it comes to these increased taxes of $250 million or $250 million, 250%. When it comes to these kind of increases, is that a level of what you think is fair?
I think we'll start there, Mr. Somerville, and I'll start off with, it's not an issue of fair, and I've already answered at least. Do I think this is one of those levels that is the responsible level based on decades and decades and decades of good financial planning? If we had great financial planning and a crystal ball, we wouldn't be sitting here. I think what we're talking about is a philosophical difference, substantially different in this budgeting in a lot of what you had talked about. I want to talk first about the $67 million budget in 2010, fast forwarding to 2018, which you now have flood control in part of that, and a substantial amount of CDBG money and NDR money all wrapped up into that budget that has to flow through the accounting practices that Mr. Lakefield had kind of outlined to me what the practices are that we have to follow per the state. And then, 2017 at 142, I think we've already gone through the difference with NAWS coming back online in those funds. What we have are the two largest infrastructure projects our city has ever undertaken all at the same time. And to say that we're blowing the budget up because of outrageous spending, I don't want to say it's disingenuous, but it is a little bit. Simply because of flood control and NAWS making up such a substantial portion of that, along with the NDR funds and all of the different programs that we have to account for within our budget. Now, in terms of the property tax, Absolutely. Like I said before, and last year when we gave them a week to find $500,000 to cut from the budget, the question we have to ask ourselves, how much are we going to bond and borrow to pay for our general spending, which only adds cost down the road in terms of debt services? This is the part that I've struggled with for so long in terms of looking at the big picture and now having a 5-year analysis. We could kick this can down the road quite a bit, and we're going to end up paying substantially more as this debt continues to mount, because flood control is going to increase our debt, and we're going to watch our bond rating go down, I guess, in higher rates and pay more and more. That's if we don't get access to legacy fund down at the legislature this year. That truly is what it comes down to, is the bond and borrow to pay for our current budget, to just say it's somebody else's problem next year or the year after that or the year after that. And that's what we're dealing with in terms of this budget. I'm going to look to our finance director in terms of the $20 million borrow and the 1.79. If I remember right, Mr. Lakefield, I've asked you about that in the flow-through account for the revenues from sales tax.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Somerville, I'll ask Derek to bring up a PDF of the pages of the budget, and I'll kind of walk you through this a little bit. Because of the rules that the city is required to follow, set forth by the Government Accounting Standard Board, we can't transfer the funds directly from the flood control sales tax to the capital portion or the debt service portion of the flood control project. It has to go through the general fund first. So this first page, which is page 2 of the budget, shows that there's an item for flood control, which is 5.24 mils, and then the debt retirement for flood control is 2.49 mils. The combination of that is what you were seeing. That it appears that it's impacting the levy. If you look at page 15 of the budget, which is the next page in the PDF, Derek, this shows the transfer into the general fund of $1.642 million coming from sales tax flood control. So we transferred in 1.642, and we transferred out slightly less than that. And there is a small amount of that that does stay in the general fund to cover administrative expenses, and that is allowed under the rules and is a common practice. And then the next page that we have put together, this shows where those items are lined out with the total flood control costs. So you see the transfer to the general fund and the transfer for the debt payment match up there as well. And then the final page accounts for that transfer back to the capital portion of the flood control. And there's the $1,079,000 that you had alluded to, and the $20 million of bonding. So in actuality, that $1 million is sales tax money that is transferred back to the flood control project through the general fund, but was originally sales tax dollars. The remaining amount that was transferred to the general fund goes to pay for the debt that is associated with the flood control project, so it doesn't impact the mill levy. When you look at the mill sheet, it has to be lined out separately, so that money that is transferred in offsets other expenses that would normally be impacted by or would affect the mill levy. So it decreases it on one hand and then increases on the other hand. So at the end of the day, it's a wash.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions for Mr. Madallen, or do you have any further questions or comments?
I would just end with saying, I think left out of the picture is the taxpayer. When you look at the rate of increases they receive, probably about a 2% annual raise right now. And I think we have a tendency to forget about it. And I can understand the demands for some of our issues. But I think there's also a possibility of cutbacks. The state done cutbacks, asked for 10% decrease in some of their in some of the areas of funding. And so I think there are alternatives, but I don't see any cuts to speak of. I mean, when I consider that and the kind of increases the taxpayer is facing right now. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Somerville.
Mr. Mayor, if I can add one more item of clarification that Mr. Somerville brought up with the increase in the total budget of $37 million. By and large, the bulk of that is made up with capital projects that are included in the budget. That wasn't the common practice in years past. In the effort to be transparent, in the last several years, we've worked to include capital projects in the budget. So instead of being included in the appendixes of the budget in a capital improvement plan, they're included in the overall budget. So some of these capital projects include $23.6 million for NAS, $5 million for flood control, another $11.9 million for acquisition, and highway capital of $875,000. So total capital of $41.3 million. The overall increase of the budget was $37 million. So that means to get that down to $37 million, there was $8.5 million in cuts that were made in other areas of the budget. The bulk of that was from a capital project that was included in last year's budget for the hydraulic improvements to the wastewater treatment facility, which was about $7.5 million. So the remainder is just cuts in day-to-day activities to offset some of that increased cost.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield.
Megan Laudenschlager, 108 19th Street Northwest. Mayor Sitma and members of the council, I'm speaking in support of the City of Minot's budget as proposed by staff. While increasing any tax, including property tax, is not a popular notion, it is one that is needed in this case. With impending commitments to NAS, flood control, and the need to maintain city services, additional revenue needs to be generated to ensure the overall financial viability of the City of Minot's operations and plans for the future. Our community didn't get into this financial predicament overnight. It took years, and as such, it will take years of painstaking and often unpopular decisions by our community's leaders to dig ourselves out of it. While this may be viewed as unpopular, I believe there are many in the community who understand that increasing this tax this year is what is needed to rectify our financial situation and get ourselves on the right path. I'm asking you to please vote in favor of the budget as proposed. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Laudenschlager. Any questions? Thank you.
Devin Walter, 1219 18th and a half Avenue Southwest. I come on behalf of the Firefighters Local 1157. Mayor Sitma, members of council. First and foremost, we'd like to thank Mayor Sitma and members of council for allowing time to address the board. Our executive board and union members would like to recognize the efforts put forth by council in regards to the retention issues for city employees that Minot is currently undergoing. We feel the proposed change to the benefit package is the right step toward fixing these retention issues and keeping our valued city employees. We hope these options continue to be strongly considered going into the final decision next week. We understand and appreciate the city's tough position concerning the focus on budget restraints, as do all city employees. Our firefighters and administration want to deliver the best services possible to our community. We take pride in knowing we're continually moving forward in training and education, all while providing the best available service to the citizens of Minot. In that effort, we need to keep our experienced firefighters from resigning due to outside job opportunities, and in addition, keep the new firefighters that we are training. The items being proposed will certainly assist in reaching these goals. In closing, thank you for your time and consideration in speaking on behalf of the Firefighters Local 1157. We all have an appreciation for the hard work shown by council to improve the quality of the community and its employees, and it has not gone unnoticed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. Any questions? Thank you, sir.
My name is Scott Jern, 412 First Street Northeast. I guess just coming to the meeting, the way it opened, there was some good points that I liked. I liked Mr. Pittner's idea too that that was a 100-year flood event. You know, is the FEMA and the flood insurance going to go up? Yeah, well, it's probably going to go up anyway. You know, I used to live 4 houses off the river, and now I'm going to be 2 houses off the river. That affects me also. I like what Shannon Strait has to say, that a lot of people just can't afford it. They're tapped out. And in response to Mr. Turness, You know, yes, the state has a Homestead Credit Act, but I think if people actually really research what that credit act does, it might credit for a portion of your property tax, but if it says 80% reduction, that doesn't mean 80% off of the top. It's 80% of the city or 80% of the county, you know, and no, you ain't hearing anyone getting kicked out of their house because it takes 5 years before you lose your house to the city or the county. Okay, I stand corrected. It's at 3, you know. I realize you guys have a tough position. I realize a lot of this is brought on by past issues. But, you know, in a business, like Mr. Soltis had alluded to, that you need to make cuts, you know. You need to look at different things. You know, you all are against stopping funding to the Magic Fund. Okay, let's look at the history of some of the Magic Fund, and I'm obviously not as well prepared as some of these gentlemen have been. You know, some of these guys that come up with all the facts and numbers, I don't have that. But a lot of the people in Minot know where that magic money went. A lot of that magic money left Minot. You know, these people come in with these big hoopla ideas, and we're going to do this, and we're going to hire 1 million people. And what did they hire? 100 people for the 4 years or whatever it took, and then they hightailed it. You know, the Magic Fund is a great idea. I get economic development, but we can develop all the economics that we want. If people can't afford to pay their property tax to stay here, it does you no good. You know, that's just my start. So, one of the things that, yeah, I've been around a while. I know what NAWS is. I didn't catch the question and get my hand up right away, but yes, I'm well aware of what the project is. The question is, who also benefits from NAWS? Who's getting the Minot City water right now? And yeah, I do want to know that answer.
Do you want to take these one at a time, or?
We'll just let me go, and then you guys can respond. That's fine. You know, and industrial park. Do we need a $25 million industrial park right now? You know, right now, as you guys have all said, flood control, biggest project we've ever taken. NAWS, we've already got a lot of money invested into it. We really can't back out of it. It's something that's good for Minot and the surrounding communities. You know, but do we have people to go into this industrial park? You know, do we have signed contracts? You know, if you were in a private business, would you go out and spend $25 million on 5 phone calls a month? Inquiring. An inquiry isn't a bank check. You know, that's an inquiry. I can inquire about a lot of things that I can't pay for. And obviously, you guys have looked at a lot of things, but don't bring up any new projects. You know, this gathering place, I don't care about a gathering place. There might be a lot of people that do, but let's wait till we have a little more money in the budget to pay for it. You know, the government, not always a good example, but with the federal government, it used to require bids on everything. And not that that's all entirely good, because just what's the cheapest isn't necessarily always the best. But I think that our city just goes with the good old boy network and buys stuff from this guy and this guy and this guy, because we always have. Every purchase the city makes, if there's 5 businesses, we should have 5 prices for what it's going to cost us to do that job. You know, whether it's plumbing, whatever the service is. You know, all these people talk about, well, now things have slowed down. Their property value went down. And I know we're not here to talk about everyone's private issues, but guess what? My taxes went up, my value went up, and the taxes are going to go up. So some people have a value reduction. For whatever reason, my house, 2 houses off of the river, where we listen to the banging of construction every day, is worth $20,000 more than it was last year. Okay? So, and for him to say that houses are not being put up for sale, in my block, there's 2 houses that they're letting go back to the bank. The people left. They said, we're done. They can deal with it however they want. They're going to take the bad mark on their credit. It is what it is. And to say that all houses sell within 3 or 4 months, My neighbor's been trying to sell his house for over a year, and I ain't even seen people looking at it. Because they ain't gonna buy stuff down in the valley. I mean, if anything.
Mr. Mayor, we have numbers of sales of homes in the property. Many of them sell.
And
for
you
more.
might have all the numbers in the world.
Right.
I asked to let me finish, and then you guys can come up with your technical jargon. You know, the oil field just went through a big slowdown. I think we're all pretty well aware of that. And what did the oil companies do? The oil companies went back to every vendor that they had and said, will you work for 40% of what you used to? Good number to strive for, and can't blame them for trying. But I'll guarantee you that a lot of them vendors to the oil field service companies, went out there, they sharpened their pencil, and they said, well, times are tough. Here's what we can work for. And I'll guarantee you it wasn't what they were working for 5 years ago. Those vendors took it in the shorts to be able to keep their job and keep things moving. We need to start looking at some of those kind of things and asking, is this the best deal we can get? You know, I mean, when I go and buy something, I'm a tightwad. You know, I call around, I price things out, and after I've got the best price, is this the best price we can get? And I know government is a little bit different, but I do believe that there's a lot of things where, okay, we ain't getting any more income. Let's look at what we're spending and get more for the things that we're spending our money on.
Thank you, Mr. Jern. I think I'll address first the gathering place. The gathering space that is being funded through the National Disaster Resiliency Grant, not property taxes.
Okay.
I said it before, we cannot use these federal grant dollars for general budget, flat out. With the bidding process, taking a look at just about every different committee of the whole meeting that we do have, we go through a number of different projects that are all bid out. About the only one that I'm aware of that has come up, at least in recent memory, that sticks out, at least in my mind, is the vehicles. We set out for bids, and in the past, we would get one back. But by and large, there is a threshold that, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Jonason, that we have to send out for bids for projects.
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. By city ordinance, anything over $15,000 we'll typically put out for bids. When it comes to projects, state law requires anything in excess of $150,000 go out for competitive bids.
And that's something we've been very cognizant about and have mentioned several times in terms of getting the best value, and have actually turned back in just the recent month low bids because they weren't low enough. They didn't meet our own project estimates from where they came in.
Right, but there's a lot of things that are savings. You add up, just because it isn't $15,000, if you're in the range of $10,000 and you can get it for $7,000 less, it doesn't meet the criteria. This falls under the carpet, so we can run with this. You know, even the smaller purchases need to be looked at. All those smaller purchases add up.
And there is a component, too, that I think I could appreciate, that if you send out every single thing to bid, the amount of time that it's going to take to actually get business done. The old adage is time is money. Sometimes you just have to get things done, and anytime it gets above that threshold, not to say that some of that couldn't be looked at. I can appreciate that, absolutely. In terms of the construction costs, we've watched our flood control costs substantially go down because of exactly what you talked about. Construction, or when the oil energy boom settled back, so did a lot of the willingness to lower those prices. And that's where we found substantial savings, not only within flood control, but within other major projects that we've got going on now. We certainly hope that holds on. Oil at 68, we'll see. But you can certainly know that that's heavily being looked at as well, wherever we can save money in terms of projects without sacrificing the quality of work, because we've seen what happens when that happens as well. Yes, thank you, Mr. Wolski.
Mr. Jern, thanks for your comments. There were a couple things that I heard that I just want to address again, so that there is a clear understanding of what is in the budget and what isn't in the budget, and there isn't an industrial park investment in this particular budget. I think there may have been some media coverage, maybe in the newspaper. I didn't catch it, but it is not in.
$25 million, I'd say that's a chunk.
Not in this budget. Maybe a community conversation that we're having about something that is needed.
But $8 million from the Magic Fund that's sitting there right now in the Magic Fund was my understanding of it. And obviously, I don't have the Mr. Medellin or Mr. Somerville's experience on it.
And what I'm saying is, when that comes forward, I assure you there will be a very spirited debate about that particular investment. But that is not as a part of the consideration tonight. And I do just want to reiterate that as of 2018, this particular year, and as proposed by our council president in 2019, we are not advancing more dollars into the Magic Fund. We have ended that practice. We are proposing to fund let's call it a minimal economic development team to assist us and attempt to keep the community, the primary pieces of a growth team working. I'll also share that this has been an ongoing conversation over the last many months, a complete review of our economic development practices. We are taking a hard look at whether the investments we are making, the practices we are deploying in that department are serving us best. And so I appreciate your concerns and comments in that area, Mr. Jern, but from my perspective up here, I think we are addressing the concerns of the community. I know the Magic Fund has been a contentious piece over the years, and there is some significant pressure coming from this council and others in the community to make sure that we are getting the most out of that, and that it's working as well as it needs to for us. So I appreciate your comments.
Well, I'd hope we're working for it, but the fact of the matter is, it seems like the people that come in from out of town have far more dollars thrown their way than people locally that have tried to submit an application to it. Do I have specific examples? No, but I've lived here my whole life. I don't sit around and read everything that's in the paper, but I certainly listen and gather and, oh, well, this one's done. No, this one was going to create 30 jobs or 40 jobs, and nothing happened. They hired 5 people, and then they're gone, and we're supposed to recoup the money, but how do you recoup no blood out of a turnip?
And Mr. Jern, I think exactly.
I want them to come to these meetings and people come up, and I kind of agree with Mr. Medellin that sometimes, well, then because you've put yourself out there and you've made the comments that all of a sudden, oh yeah, that guy, I came up here for the Ann Street Bridge, that's a block from my house, right now it's all tore up. So when them kids, now they can't come across that bridge because it's under construction, but now we're going to have a wall so that if my grandkids want to walk from Central down to my house after school, they have to go over to 3rd Street or over to Broadway and can't come through a wall. It's a different subject.
We do have an opening in that one that is proposed.
We added it
on Main Street?
Yes, by the Ann Street Bridge opening. Yes.
Okay, I stand
corrected. I don't want to get off topic either, Mr. Jern, but thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Well, that's what I have.
Any further questions for Mr. Jern? I do appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nancy Bruce. Yeah, I got married.
Congratulations.
Okay. Yeah. Hate to see a good woman go down, don't you? Okay, I want to say something. I see some of my heroes are here tonight. The firemen, the policemen. I thank you for everything you do because you're grossly underpaid. That being said, I know of 43 people since July that have moved out of Minot because the taxes are so high. They moved to Underwood, Wilton, Stanley, and Lincoln, North Dakota. People have not had a raise. I know people that have not had a raise in this town for 6 years. Okay, how are they supposed to save money when we don't have money to save when you guys increase taxes? You're taking the lazy man's way out. Let's increase taxes so we can figure it out. That's a lazy man's way. I remember talking to Tim Mahalik at one time, Sean, I think you heard this conversation, that we need to utilize what we have. Like businessmen, take them aside and say, how'd you be so successful? How did you budget your business so it could be better? We are spending way too much money in this town for no reason. If my taxes are gonna go up, I want something to show for them. Like, give these people their insurance, for the love of our Lord, and the policemen. I mean, I called 17 other cities. They pay for their policemen's insurance and their firemen's insurance, and we can't. That is so sad. I think the citizens of Minot should be able to vote for everything that we do. We did not want the Mesa Arena, got that anyway. We didn't want that diaper over the dome or over at the college. We got that. We can't even use it. It's ridiculous. The city's taking the lazy man's way out. There are people in this room that have gotten notice that the city ran out of money. And now they can't get paid for their flooded business or their flooded home. Sucks to be you. There's nothing. They get nothing. You need to utilize what we have. We don't need a gathering place. We have them all over town. They're called bars. Parks.
Okay, we're going to stop the background noise while she's talking, please. Continue, please.
Okay, that's fine, thanks. And your own home, if the gathering place is constructed and the government pays for it, I get that. But who has to maintain it? Who's gonna mow the lawn? The city of Minot, the tax-paying money. Who's gonna remove the snow? The city of Minot, the tax-paying money. We need to stop and think before we keep building. We don't have any reason to build a gathering place. I mean, if we don't use the money, send it back. Send it back to the government, who cares? We could let's utilize the parks. Yeah, let's utilize the auditorium. God knows that's never gets used. I mean, All Seasons Arena, the Flickertail Garden, let's utilize what we have. Instead of building something that is gonna be all the rage for 6 months, then after that, no one's gonna care. I know I'll never go down there. I don't even use the parking ramps. I don't wanna get into that. And that's it, that's all I'm gonna say. I'm gonna take up 20 minutes of everybody's time.
Thank you, Ms. Bruce.
Yes.
Mr. or Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Sibma. Nancy, I have to tell you, I always really appreciate your passion.
Yeah. Well, somebody's got to say something, you know? Some people don't want to say anything because they don't have any spine. Well, I do.
Yeah, it's all right. And I guess I'm going to push back a little bit since I spent some time going to Rapid City in May. And, and they built a gathering place, and they built it in their heart of downtown. And they've had over $50 million that's been reinvested in their community as a result of building something.
Okay, but they're twice as big as we are.
They're about 60-some thousand people. So they are bigger than us.
Yeah. And they can afford that. We can't.
Okay.
Yep.
Nancy, just let him finish so he can continue.
I make mistakes with my numbers too. I made them a few months ago, so Mr. Walski had to correct me, so I apologize. But the point being is we had a devastating flood. And I think if there's something that the community could benefit from, and I know you've went through your own challenges as well, I think that us spending those federal dollars to build something that by and large, the vast majority of the time should be free to the public, to kids, I think that's a good use. And maybe I'm wrong, but I've also been tasked with trying to spearhead that project. And so I guess I'm going to push back a little bit because I think we need to lean in. And yes, we need to build within. We need to figure out some creative opportunities to reinvest with the area that we have and not continue to expand out where we have to pay for it. But I think we have to lean in and we have to get creative. And I always appreciate you coming because we need your passion and we need you to continue to be involved. And I appreciate it. So thank you and congratulations.
I just want you guys to think before you do something. I think that we should vote on this. I really do. Everything, you know, you guys make a command decision. We have to live with it. Okay, why don't we say, no, we don't want this, and then don't build it. If we don't want it, then don't build it. If we want it, then go for it. But we need, you guys need our opinion. We pay this money. We pay taxes every week, every 2 weeks. We are paying for this, and so are you guys. So why would you want to build something that's not going to be utilized? I mean, like I said, it's going to be all the rage for 6 months. Then it's going to go in the toilet.
I think I'll only answer that with, again, I think it's a philosophical difference of opinion on it.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to say what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy.
You bet.
Mr. Pittner, Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Nancy, for your comments. Obviously, just want to point out some things as far as the investments into some of these things, like the bubble. I'll be honest, as a citizen of mine, not an alderman at the time, I was skeptical as well. As would it be utilized? What benefit does it provide to the community? And I think you would go to a number of soccer clubs, a number of softball organizations, softball clubs for our youth that use that year-round, that give them something to do, give them something to spend their time with as far as staying busy and active as a youth. And I think that's our responsibility as a council and as a community to provide those areas for children and for families. Bars, I'm married, I have 2 children. I don't get out to the bar very much anymore. I'd like to have a park. I'd like to have these parks or these gathering spaces. If we can afford them and if we can do it wisely, I think they're great ideas. But again, wisely. And I think that's what this council is trying to do is make wise decisions with the information that we have. As far as your comment with business owners, getting business owners and asking them, and that's something that we're trying to do right now as a council is through the IEDC report with the Economic Development Task Force, we're trying to get those business owners together in the same room and move our economy forward and really build something here and build the base like it's been talked about so that we can lessen the burden from everyone currently in the city of Minot. So just want to give my opinion on some of those things. Like I say, they might seem silly at first, but like I say, that bubble to me has been a great thing for the community and great thing for the youth, and I look forward to my children using it someday.
Thank you, Alderman Pittner and Mr. Enslin.
Okay, I just want to address what you just said. We have ball diamonds all over the city that are locked, that the kids cannot play in, okay? They come over and play in the ice skating rink that was built over by Perkett School because they can't get in the diamonds that are locked up, that are paid for by the taxpayer. So when you say gathering place and your kids can use stuff, they can't. The only people that can use those are teams. When the kids want to play, they can't go in those. They're locked up. So that's an issue you should look into.
I just want to clarify something really quick, Mr. Enslin. I'm talking about the bubble in the wintertime because that's when it's installed is for our youth that are in these programs, these summer sports. That's just for clarification. Yeah. That it provides those clubs that can go year round that don't live in Arizona or California where they can play year round because of weather permitting. This allows those sports teams, those organizations, those kids, because obviously they're not going to be going to the ice rink playing ball in the wintertime anyway. So I mean, like I say, that's my clarification on that.
Okay, I just got 3 things. I wanted to ask the finance director, but I'd like to ask the city council. We paid $4 million for the addition to the dump, and it was valued at $1.3 million. Why did we pay $4 million for something that was $1.3 million? Can anybody answer that?
I'll jump into this one right away unless you want, Mr. Walski. The issue is land is always a price until it becomes the only land that is available to purchase. Talk to the folks in Grand Forks or any other municipality when it comes to trying to acquire land to put a landfill in it, the price now becomes substantially higher than what any other ag value would be around it. It becomes a limit-only quantity that at the end of the day, they could have asked for whatever they wanted. And that's a hard pill to swallow. That's a really hard pill to swallow because the only other option, at least, and I will preface this with the issue is on the table right now because we are going through that study analysis, that the only other issue that has been talked about since 2002 for the inability to find any land to purchase has only now become available around the landfill in the last few years, and that's when that was made. So Grand Forks paid an absorbent amount of money for the land that they ended up moving their landfill to that was only in...
good purchase.
I'm saying, what is land worth when it's the only land available to buy?
And can we use that? The second thing is, I think we spend way too much money on studies. The city studies everything. We have an engineering department. We shouldn't have to spend money on studies. If we need to have a study, we should ask the college maybe. Maybe we could get the college to study something for us for free. It's just an idea that I had. But we're spending a lot of money on studies. A few years back, we spent money on a study to see if we could raise the water bill in Minot. To me, I couldn't believe it. But we spend money on a study to see whether we should raise the water bill or not in Minot. And of course, the study said we should. So they raised the water bill. I'm just saying that we should not be spending money on studies. The last thing I want to say is the federal government, the state, and the city of Minot, there is plenty of waste that goes on and you all see it in the federal government, you all see it in the state, and I see it, and the citizens see it in the city. I think what you guys could do in the city is look at that very carefully.
Should we put a study together on it?
Put a study together and see how much money you can save on waste.
Sorry.
Okay? I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions? Alderman Walski.
Just a brief response to Mr. Enslin and the final point, or the point on studies. You know, it's a double-edged sword, right? You know, what happens when we get into situations and we haven't fully considered them? I think if we look back in past on a topic that's come up a number of times tonight, the parking garages, people would really wish we had gone back and pursued a little more due diligence on the front end of these. So that is the purpose behind all this stuff. We don't have the in-house expertise to tackle every one of these issues, and some of this is really nuanced, high-level stuff. You know, water rate studies for sewers are not as simple as I think. They're not nearly as simple as I imagined they were before sitting in this chair. And so I just wanted to share that perspective, that we get judged on both sides of these things, and I think there is, we engage these consultants we hire to have these studies done with the hopes that we can be the best stewards of the dollars we can be.
I believe that a lot of the studies are done to, I want to say, protect people from responsibility for making a decision. They hire us to have a study done, and of course, whoever hires the study is going to get their expected outcome. I mean, if I hire somebody, they're going to try to work on my opinion and come back with what I want to see, not what somebody else wants to see. So a study is used in a lot of cases, I won't say all, but a lot of cases to protect yourself from criticism for doing something, and you can revert back to the study and say, well, the study said I could do this, so therefore we did it. Okay, instead of saying I made the decision, you guys made the decision, and it's our responsibility. So,
thank you, Mr. Enslin. Yep.
Nathan Ruthier, 1805 Central Avenue West. A few weeks ago, months ago, can't remember now, but it was stated that some of the increase of the budget was the extra insurances of the properties that we acquired during the flood buyout. Is that correct? Or not the insurance, but the extra cost of having these extra properties has been raising the budget, or is a raise in the budget?
Are you referring to maintenance costs?
Maintenance, insurance, because whatever property we have, we probably have to carry insurance or maintenance or whatever, correct?
There has been increased costs for taking care of some of those properties, keeping grass cut, snow plowed during the.
How much of that property is outside of the dike area or the wall area?
I think to that I might look to Mr. Jonason, but the majority of what we have acquired for the Enhanced Flood Protection Project is within the footprint or expected to be included within the actual either dike or wall wall area.
So,
and correct me, Mr. Jonason, if I'm mistaken.
Mr. Mayor, you're correct. The properties that, anything that's been acquired for the flood control works that we're responsible to maintain are needed for the long-term Mouse River Flood Protection Project.
The only exception might be some of the blighted properties that we're buying to mitigate, tear down, and trying to sell through the next door neighbor program right now.
okay, so that's kind of pretty much some of the question that I was asking, what I was going to head towards there. I hate talking about the parking garage because it's over, it's beat, it's there, we got to deal with it. But the question on it is, it's kind of to what Mr. Pittner said, you gotta spend money to make money. What are we doing to promote that, to encourage people to use them, to help the revenue of the parking garages, to help offset the costs?
We're looking right now, and it's early discussions, and I might be a little remiss to get too deep into details only because we haven't had the proper discussions with another entity, but looking at discussions for reaching out to them for a volume use for a substantial amount of the year. So we are trying to find some revenues to offset those operating costs right now until we get through litigation.
Okay, because that's where I was, beat me to that one again, because I've talked to several Central Campus folks and parents that the kids don't use it because they just don't. So I didn't, where are you heading there? And then my thought here is the 18.5%. Yeah, it's there. But I think what some of us are mad about is the letter that came out, or it's like, well, we did what we can do. Swallow it. Do better. You guys all campaigned on it. We're not looking for you guys to wipe out the 18.5%. We know that's not going to be possible. But do better. Whittle it down some. Get us back down to 15. Get a couple % off. Show us that you're doing better.
And I think that's where some of the misconception from previous budget cycles, where in a very quick compressed version, is it used to be that the budget would plop down on a desk in August, about a month and change after the election, and then it was up to the council to start whittling. We redesigned that process this year to where we started meeting with staff early on, even before the election cycle began, to start working on priorities so that we don't end up with a fat budget to come up here and start slicing and dicing, pitting, for lack of a better term, the elected officials against city staff in what their priorities should be. So we helped them design what the priorities were even before this started its initial draft, so that we could bring together, I think, a more well-rounded piece even before it touched on the alderman's desk. And City Manager Barry, I think you had something to add.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know it's difficult for the public because they don't see all the behind-the-scenes work that goes into the generation of the budget. There's enormous work that happens. And I just want to maybe give a small window into what sort of happens. When we started this budget process this year, we were looking at a 47 mil increase. That's a big increase. We have gone through a painstaking series of processes to get it down to 22.8. When we say it's difficult to get there, we mean it's difficult to get there. We are delaying projects, which is something we're trying to get desperately out of doing. We're pushing a 20-year maintenance cycle for roads. You saw that presentation just not too long ago when the cycle's supposed to be 5. It's costing us more because we're not adequately maintaining the infrastructure we already have. But we're still having to do that to mitigate for this. We've reduced operational expenses by almost $1.5 million. We're using $1.5 million in reserve money to balance this budget, which is a bad practice, but it's one that we've chosen to do to mitigate for this sizable increase that we would have otherwise need. We're working with the legislature to make adjustments in the amount of state funding that comes our way. We're being very aggressive about that. And we've reduced community grants and donations. We've done enormous things in the budget to get it down to 22.8. And I know the public doesn't see that. So when they come to us and say, cut it, just why aren't you guys cutting anything? They need to understand we've cut more than half of the 47 mills that we otherwise would have needed this year. We are optimistic about the future as it relates to additional increases in state funding that's going to come our way, and maybe even the the online sales tax revenues that will come our way. We are holding out hope that those things will have a positive impact on our budget next year. But as it is right now, we've done what we can to try to get it as low as we can, given the budget principles that the mayor has just described.
And lastly, as I mentioned before, whatever we cut now is in terms of service, substantial service. And it comes back to that philosophical difference of, are we going to bond and borrow to fund our basic services today to pay back more either next year or just down the road? And that's really the facet that I have a very difficult time accepting, is bond today and pay more tomorrow just to maintain. This one correction, I think, as City Manager Barry indicated, gets us on that path to where we're not coming back to the trough every single year. Alderman Padragula.
I just wanted to strongly support what the city manager and mayor have said. Again, my service started originally in 1998, and this is the most unified budget process we've ever had. Staff got early on their marching orders, if you will, their direction from the entire council, not just one individual or two, in terms of what our priorities were. And they've come back to us periodically to check and touch base and have kept us informed. And I think that I'm just very impressed. I'm surprised they could come up with the savings that they could. I think they've worked the hardest I've ever seen, again, since 1998. And again, I think they've gotten much more of a sense of direction and focus than they've ever had. Tom, I think, has spelled out, 14 budget priorities or goals that he directed his managers to work around or work toward. This is markedly different. This is like night and day from what it was years ago. Is it where it should be? No, I don't think so. But again, we're running into some constraints. One of those, for example, is we don't have the money to hire people that will save us money. One of the things I'm always thinking about is, do we need a contracts officer? I mean, several of us on the council are concerned about the contracting process and making sure it always does get the best bid, tightening it up so we don't have to reject and rebid things, which comes up again and gets a lot of complaints from contractors and other people and vendors. So that's one person we need. As for the legal staff, I do a lot of legal work. I'm also a forensic psychologist in addition to being a clinical psychologist. We need another couple lawyers. They're expensive. And some of the stuff we do have to farm out. I'm also a part-time consultant. I put in 5 hours this morning consulting for the Social Security Administration. They paid me $160. They probably should be working at a store or something, make more money that way. But as a consultant, I think you're right. And the previous speaker's right. We have to be very careful, very judicious on when we use consultants. And sometimes they really are necessary and they really save money. So again, we're in the position sometimes where we just don't have the resources to do the things and get the people that we would need to save more money. A good example is our antiquated information management systems and financial systems. We couldn't figure out interest on accounts that people owed us. When I started my business in 1989, when I bought Quicken or QuickBooks or whatever the heck it is, the accounting package, it calculates interest. And yet we don't have the kind of computer system, the kind of financial reporting system we need. So I think part of what I'm saying is I think we need to spend money to save money and to make sure that our expenditures are prudent and wise. And, we're doing it in bits and pieces, but I think one thing I can really assure you about is that the council has been much more involved and the administration has been much, much more focused. And we've been working in unison more than I've ever seen. Could it be better? Yes, it could be. But I'm just amazed. I'm just very impressed and wanted to reinforce what the mayor was saying and what the city manager was saying, again, from my historical perspective.
So you guys all feel what is on this budget is 100% needed, not a want?
I'd say about the only single item that we say, or that some folks might say is a want rather than a need, and I would argue substantially different, is the roof on our parking garage, because that is a substantial investment that we have that's been exposed for entirely too long already, and is, that would be a threat to its degradation. And that's why we directed staff to say that is a need, not a want. Outside of that, we have spent a significant amount of time in the needs program and ensuring that we're not borrowing to kick that can down the road to take care of what we need to today. And we're still not there, but I think Like I had mentioned before, this adjustment puts us in position for years to come to start making up those without new taxes.
Yeah, that parking garage is like a drunken uncle. Nobody wants him there, but you stuck with him. All right, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Christy Miller. I live on 203 7th Avenue Southeast. I just want you guys to know that there's some single household people out there, families, who now can't afford the taxes in their homes. That's really sad. Have you guys noticed how many homes are for sale in Minot because people can't afford to live here anymore? Even if they liked it, they can't afford it. And that's not fair. You guys sit there and you talk about the gathering places. There are other places we can meet. I was just at the Park and Recs meeting. They're talking about making new parks and, you know, doing this to this park, and I'm sitting there thinking, and I'm struggling to pay my taxes, and you guys are spending thousands and thousands to either build or to improve. That's not a need. It's not. And I think this should be brought to a vote. We should have the right to say no. It's not fair, Sean. It's not. You guys just say, okay, we want this, we're gonna do for it. We're just gonna go for it. You guys lump it. Well, now you guys are gonna see, if you look, go look to see how many homes are for sale. And start asking these people, why are you leaving? Can't afford to live here. Minot was supposed to be, I just saw on the news today that it was one of the most best places to live in the state. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, well, I can't live here anymore. Can't afford my house. That's sad. And people that can't afford it, not just me, but the elderly. What about the disabled? That's something you guys got to think about, because it's out there. Those people probably can't come here to say something, but Sean, I had to come here to say this is just wrong. Thanks.
Thank you. And that is one of the hardest things to mull through this entire process.
But it's real. It is so real. And it's not fair. I work for the county, haven't had a raise in 4 years. We're told to tighten our budget or tighten our belts, and we do. What's your guys' excuse? I had a big house out in the county, huge, 2 acres. I pay more for my 1950s house in taxes. Nothing's been done. I just made the repairs, no new additions or anything, and I pay almost $4,000 in taxes. Why? When I told my siblings in other states and either counties, they were floored. There's no rhyme or reason, Sean. I should not be paying that for taxes. There's no rhyme or reason. I've called you guys as people. They're like, well, that's just the way it is because of the mill levies. We're not getting this from the state. No, you guys, you talked about being creative. You better get creative because you got more people coming and leaving because they just can't afford to live here, and that's reality. Your little parks that you guys want and the little gathering place, that's just a need.
I'm going to correct you on this again. We cannot use NDR federal grant dollars to put into our general budget. We cannot. If we did, the federal government is going to make us repay out of property taxes to refund back to them, costing us twice what it would be. So that is the most difficult part, is understanding that is not property tax dollars. That is not mill levy impact. That is a grant that the U.S. federal government said, build this or send it back.
Do you guys not just sit there and think, well, we're not just going to do this? You guys keep saying we need to like beef up, we need to revamp, we need to make more modern. There's some things that you just shouldn't say, okay, we're going to do it, we've done without, and we're just going to just lump it. That's not fair. That's not fair to us.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Sitma. Ma'am, I'd like you to know that my mother, I've tried to sell her house twice over the last couple of years. I can't sell it. I'd like to sell it. I hate to bring personal stories, but since you, it's a challenge. We live on the east side of Minot where flood protection is going to come down the road. All the increased flood insurance rates. Yes, I see a lot of property in my neighborhood that's for sale. I know a lot of people trying to sell property, and I'm keenly aware.
So then you guys should be sitting there, instead of making it worse for those people who are trying to leave, you should try to find a way to make it better.
Sure. Do you, I'd also like you to know that if you think that I'm not aware of the decisions that are going to be made tonight, how that's going to affect somebody if they want to buy a house or sell a house, that certainly factors into my decision-making, ma'am. So it's not like
Well, I know, but you know what, I'm talking from my own personal experience. I'm a single household income person.
Yep.
So you might be married, I don't know, and I don't care. I'm telling you from my experience, this is ridiculous. There's people, I don't have a big fancy house. Like I said, 1950s. I should not be paying just shy of $4,000. That is just ridiculous.
Thank you, ma'am, for your comments.
Thank you for your comments. Any other comments or questions? Coming up on 3 hours. I'll ask one more time, any comments or questions for the public hearing? If not, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Moved by Pittner,
Second.
second by Alderman Olson. Any discussion on the motion to close the public hearing? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson. Yes.
All right, motion passes. That takes us to number 6 on our agenda, which is the adopt budget ordinance on first reading. At this point, I would entertain a motion for the first reading of the budget.
I would like to make a motion to amend the budget in first reading.
Need a motion first.
Oh, motion to approve?
Motion, you're gonna
Motion
make a
to amend?
motion to approve the budget with whatever potential changes you want.
Okay. I would like to make a motion to approve with the amendment of diverting of the 15% of the first penny that's allocated, which usually goes into the magic fund but does not. In this year's budget, it's been proposed to divert to flood protection. I would like to divert of that 15% of the first penny, $250,000 to be set aside to pursue the IEDC report findings through the implementation of an economic development task force and further developing of a 501c3.
We have a motion on the floor for using a portion of that 15%, $250,000 for
Basically, the implementation of economic development task force.
Okay, to develop the 501c3.
Correct.
We have a motion by Alderman Pittner. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Alderman Wolski. Discussion.
I'm going to request a little clarification, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Alderman Pittner.
And I guess Mr. Zakian, I don't know if Mr. Zakian's still in here. Basically, through some of the shareholder meetings that we've had in the development of an economic development task force through the IDC report findings, trying to bolster economic development in the community. It's been stated that there's going to be some startup costs with this. There's going to be some development of the 501c3 to get it started, some seed money, if you will. I'd like to see the city, instead of diverting all that to flood protection and not to the magic fund, but try to bolster the base, as Mr. Lakefield stated. That's how we grow this. How Mr. Mayor also stated that's the goal. That's the long-term goal of this council, is to try to lessen the burden of property taxes to this community by building our base, by developing our economy, getting our business owners together, our leaders in the community together to develop an economic strategy to advance us and basically make our increase what value comes from our sales tax, increase the value of a penny, if you will.
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Wolski.
So my understanding of the motion, Alderman Pittner, would be that we adopt the proposed budget on first reading, but with the change that out of the first penny, 15% economic development, which is right now recommended by, I think, President Janser to be reprogrammed. About 10% of that would have been redirected to flood control. You're proposing we redirect approximately 2.5% to this the implementation of the IEDC reports.
Correct.
Would your proposal also include the remaining 7.5% that was previously recommended to go to flood protection, continue to go to flood protection?
Correct.
City Manager Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Wolski, I appreciate that clarification. I'd like to get one more if we can. Does your motion, Alderman Pittner, include the slight modifications that have been identified earlier in the meeting today in regard to Mr. Lakefield's letter dated 9/17/18 for the JAG grant as well as the storm sewer development revenue?
Yes, I will include that in my motion.
Does the second agree?
Agrees.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Mr. Pittner, I may need a little bit of clarification on this as well, just so that we have a full understanding. With the 2.5% out of the 15%, for operation development use or for seed money as well for part of the activities of economic development?
I don't think I know that. I don't think the task force has been assembled yet, and I don't think we can identify what those might be. I would leave that at the discretion of that task force and/or the council if seen fit. But I'd hate for us to come back to kick the can down the road, if you will, on funding this implementation. I think this is something that we can get ahead of. I think being at the last stakeholders meeting, this is something that we're going to move forward with, and I'd like to see those be able to hit the ground running, if you will, because I think we're a little behind schedule right now. Will those dollars go into funding or day-to-day activities? I don't know, but I'd like to see that started right now.
So essentially the budget for use within those activities, though, for that 501c3. Yes, Alderman Patergula.
Could we ask Mr. Zakian about how much money would be needed for this?
Mr. Zakian. As Mr. Zakian comes forward, I do recall just the actual physical process and cost associated with creating the 501c3 is a few $100s. And I would assume the activities within that development is what this would be for. Mr. Zakian.
Mayor, members of the City Council, staff, to actually create a 501c3, Mayor, that is correct. It doesn't take a lot of money to actually start the 501c3. I can envision as we move forward that there will be sources of funding we can pursue that will need matches. I would just offer in terms of I appreciate this whole discussion. Obviously, I'm a big advocate of the IDC report in this. I would point out it will be a policy call, but in the context of what may be needed, I would envision that anything or everything that comes out of the task force that you will be deciding on at the next council meeting, they would be eligible uses for the existing MAGIC fund.
I'm sorry?
They would be eligible uses for the existing MAGIC fund. What I primarily envision being necessary is matches. If, for instance, there are several federal agencies we can go after for grants to help start up those programs, every one of them will require a match that we can't get waived. So if we, for instance, were to go after a grant from an agency for $250,000, we may need $100,000 or $50,000 match. That is precisely one of the envisioned uses, and certainly could be a very prudent use of some modest MAGIC fund, existing MAGIC fund allocation.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Simmons. John, can you remind us, isn't there a line item within NDR for fostering economic resiliency? And why would we not use that money?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Straight, there is a line item that we still have approximately $150,000 for. because we've been prudent in how we've been using the study funds. I would only caution you that obviously, yes, we could use those funds for implementation, but it would be limited to flood-affected areas. In the context of the greater picture, remember, unfortunately, all the NDR funds, we have to connect it to a flood impact. So areas like the downtown, yes, I could easily justify that when you come up with the ideas that will be coming forward. But in terms of the overall citywide picture, we're going to have to ultimately look for other resources.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yes, Finance Director Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to get on the clarification bandwagon, make sure I understand exactly what is being proposed here. If I understand it correctly, Alderman Pittner proposed a flat amount of $250,000. That is correct. We do the calculation. That is a little less than 1/4 of what would normally be allocated to economic development. However, that number that's included in the budget is based on a percentage of a forecasted collection amount. So that percentage would fluctuate with whatever's collected if the amount allocated to economic development for this purpose is a static $250,000. So I just wanted to make sure that we're clear, because this will require an ordinance change. So we need to make sure that we are all on the same page to craft that language.
City Manager Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Lakefield does bring up a good point, and if Alderman Pittner does want to continue with the motion, it might be best to have it in percentage form than in just straight dollar form in order to satisfy the concern Director Lakefield has brought up.
Okay, would it be appropriate to amend it to 2%? Would that fall roughly, like we said, into that?
7.5.
Of the.
If I were to offer a proposal, this is all coming out of the economic development, 15% in the first penny, I believe, which we have previously redirected to 5% economic development, 10% flood protection. If we simply change those percentages to 7.5% for economic development and 7.5% flood protection, that might allow the seed capital that Alderman Pittner is sort of suggesting be placed aside. It would fall under economic development. I'm not sure if that would be appropriate or not, but.
Finance Director Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, I would probably suggest the opposite, that the static amount would simplify things tremendously, because if the sales tax collections increase, that would increase the amount that would be allocated to all of those different areas. Mm-hmm. The converse would also be true. If it were to go down, it would decrease proportionately amongst them as well. In addition, the other portion, or one of the other portions that's funded by the Economic Development Sales Tax, is the funding of the operations for MADC. So with the fluctuation of collections, that allocation would be impacted as well. I think we can still allocate a flat dollar amount. We just need to make sure we're all on the same page when we do the language in the ordinance.
So Alderman Lakefield, it's getting to be that time. Finance Director Lakefield, respectively, we can have the $250,000 flat rate come out of that portion as part of the motion and not worry about overstepping that ordinance or having issue there. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, the first penny has the 15% allocation to permanent flood control, the Magic Fund, or a combination of both. So we will have to do an ordinance amendment to clarify that 15%, and if we do it something more vague, just like economic development or something like that, that's something we could consider. But we would have to revise the first penny sales tax ordinance if this is the direction that the council wants to go.
Yes, Council President Janser.
Mr. Mayor and fellow council members, I certainly support the idea of continuing to pursue the recommendations of the IADC report and our economic development efforts as recommended by that body in that report. However, I appreciate Alderman Pittner's motion. However, I have great hesitancy to support this amendment simply because I think it is premature in that we don't yet have the task force. We don't yet have a clear idea of what their needs may be. And furthermore, as Mr. Zakian points out, that is in fact what we have the Magic Fund set up for, is for economic development. And I think that if we need $250,000 or whatever the amount turns out to be for matching or for supporting these economic development efforts, that money is sitting there, and that's where it should come from, not from some arbitrary carve-out fencing of money that we might do here tonight. So I don't believe that I can support this amended motion.
Just the regular motion, actually. Alderman Pavragula.
I wanted to second what my bearded colleague with glasses on the other side, who's also balding, has said. I think it is premature. I think it's a good idea, but I'm a little concerned that we don't have fleshed out yet the structure of what this new economic development entity will be like. And I think it is premature. I think that's the right word for it. I don't think it's a bad idea, but I think it's a little bit early. And I also feel that the money really should be coming from the Magic Fund. That's our economic development pool. And I think we do need to relook at that very carefully. I also think this is one of those things where I think internally within the community and the organizations like MADC and Chamber of Commerce and Visit Minot, we have the expertise. This is not something we need to go outside for. We have gotten the other perspective from IEDC. Now it's a matter of us, in our own wisdom, our own experience, deciding how to best implement or not implement some of those recommendations. So I think it's premature. I don't say it's a bad idea, but I think it's just a touch early. So I also would vote against it.
Alderman Pittner.
I respect the comments of my fellow alderman, and maybe Mr. Zakian, you've given some clarification. Sure. So for any seed money or any funding that would be required to match grants or possible funding vehicles, they would have access, this Economic Task Force would have access to the Magic Fund dollars.
That's, I think it's a good question. Before, Mayor Sitma, Alderman Pittner, I think this is a good discussion. I think it clearly demonstrates the priority focus you have in all your minds about economic development. I would, before I answer that, I would just make one observation, and a lot of us have been discussing this, and it kind of got a little bit pushed sideways because the IDC report came out with all that's energy, but I'm looking at Council President Janser because he was part of a task force. We had begun discussing better framing and structuring the Magic Fund and more prioritizing its potential uses with the goal to bring it back to this council. I would say that based on everything we've heard, as an economic developer, the Magic Fund is a phenomenal tool that every city in this country would give their collective soul for to have. It is a phenomenal economic development tool to help us expand our revenue base. I do think where there is a need is to better fine-tune its use and focus its use. And I think what this offers the opportunity is, to answer your question, Alderman Pittner, is that, yes, this is exactly the kind of use, even in the current policy, that is envisioned by the Magic Fund. I would say that any uses that we need coming out of the IDC report and the task force that will be created, it would be a perfect fit to match whatever is necessary from the Magic Fund to go after those other sources.
Thank you for that clarification. And I guess with that clarification, I would probably withdraw my amended motion to the budget, sans the items from the memo we received. If the IDC report or the Economic Development Task Force will have access to the Magic Fund dollars, I guess I would feel comfortable with that unless there's some other clarification on that.
So just so we're clear here, you're just removing the change to the percentage or dollar amount, but still keeping in
the memo from
Mr. Lakeville for the original motion. Does the second agree?
So this would be the adoption of the proposed budget with the amended changes that the city manager offered to us today.
That is correct. Second agrees. City Manager Barry.
Yes, the second hasn't agreed yet because I haven't heard you agree yet. So hold on that if you would mind, respectfully, Alderman Wolski. Okay. I just want to make clear that the Magic Fund has its own board, and that board must approve whatever's being recommended by whatever group or whatever. And if they do not, of course, City Council has to second that approval. But if they do not send it to the City Council because that board didn't approve it, I don't believe that it would come to the City Council. We could check on that, but I'm not certain about that. So Alderman Pittner, I'm not real certain what.
I appreciate that clarification because I was not aware of that. So man, we are all over the place.
Alderman Pittner, perhaps maybe I can offer this to move things along here. This is first reading. We have second reading coming up here in a little more than a week. This would be a good opportunity to flesh out some of the details from the Magic Fund Board and find those answers on whether or not they might be amiable to go ahead and fund this. And if not, perhaps it can be revisited or discussed at further length. But to find out those answers between now and then, I think agreeing with Alderman Janser, it might be a little bit premature until we get some definitive answers from some of those folks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the comments and the clarification on this. And I guess that's where I sit now with some of these clarifications. The discussion is that, to piggyback off of Alderman Straight's comments from earlier, we were elected, not hired, we were elected to make decisions and to make decisions for progress. And I think I would actually stand by my original motion to withdraw my withdrawal, and if you will. And I would support this because I think this is a responsibility of the city. We've invested in these studies, if you will, and I think it's time to actually see some benefit from this. So I would actually support holding that static number from the dollars diverted to flood protection or economic development or the combination of the two. So.
Does the second agree?
I think while I greatly appreciate Alderman Pittner's comments, I am going to withdraw my second if I can, if we entered the procedural soup here deep enough. But I think I would like to get some clarity back to simply the original proposed budget with the President's message and the changes today.
I guess following Robert's rules of orders here, we have a motion on the floor for the flat rate of $250,000 coming from the 15% of the first penny to fund the IEDC economic development and the development of 501c3 for those activities. Do we have a second? Do we have a second? Last time, do we have a second? Motion fails for lack of a second. Do we have a motion?
Mayor Sitma, I would move we adopt the 2019 proposed budget, including the President's message, the recommendations in the President's message, and the amendments as offered by the City Manager today.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Wolski, second by Alderman Olson. Discussion. Yes, Alderman Wolski.
I think right off the bat, Alderman Pittner, I'll be open to revisiting a bit more clarity to this on second reading. I think where you're at is important. I think there also might be a role for us as aldermen in being advocates for what you're talking about through the Magic Fund Committee process. That committee exists for a reason. It's a check and balance, and it's an oversight, and I think we would want them to be a part of any economic development conversations we're having and any proposed changes to the use of the fund. So I don't want to sidestep that or move maybe faster than the political process would dictate being wise. So that's my thoughts on that particular portion of this.
Thank you, Alderman Wolski. Any further discussion? Alderman Olson.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I do want to acknowledge all the people that have spoken tonight. They've come, many of them have come prepared with a lot of information to share with us. And I know that the budget that we are proposing to them is a tough pill to swallow. And it's been tough for us to go through this process. But not only do we have the responsibility of proposing a budget that is meeting the needs of the city, it's providing the services to the citizens of Minot. And I think that this is the only way that we're able to do this, is by approving this budget.
Thank you, Alderman Olson. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Sima. I was proposed, or I was ready to come tonight to offer an amendment to cut this in half. And I think I realized that that was going to fail. And it is in absolutely no reflection of the work that's gone into it, the president's message, Tom, Dave, the need for staff pay increases. It is my utter concern also for the future of this community. And I told Mr. Barry after the previous city council meeting that I had some concerns with the future of getting the public to not just support us and buy in. And clearly there's going to be some people that are fine with the budget tonight, and clearly there are people that are strongly opposed to it. But I'm concerned with the future for the need to pass through our leadership how we're going to fund some of this outside of what we are deciding here tonight. And that is my overall concern for the budget tonight. And I appreciate everybody's work. I certainly recognize this is going to pass tonight, but I'm going to vote no. And I mean no disrespect to anyone, but it is out of just my concern for the residents and the need to have some yes votes later in much bigger settings that it concerns me to no end. And it comes back to the fact that I'm thinking of the residents on the east side of Minot. And if we start to talk about slowing down flood protection because the work is getting tough, and you can clearly say, you know, Alderman Straight, you're voting against it tonight, but it is out of my concern for the future of how we're going to fund this in its entirety, where we're going to lose the political will of the populace to pay for it, that I fear what's going to happen to the other side of town. And with that, Mayor Sitma, I hope that is somewhat coherent. It's late. So I appreciate everybody's hard work, but I'm going to vote no.
Alderman Pittner.
For not the same reasons as Alderman Straight, I obviously made a motion. I feel it's responsibility of the city to, like I stated before, not get the blinders on and focus on flood control, focus on this one infrastructure project, and kind of steamroll it through this generation of taxpayers. I don't see the benefit in that. I see a greater benefit in investing into our base and into our infrastructure as far as a community, as far as the economic development. For that reason, I'll be voting no. But I agree with this budget. I agree with the need for providing these services, not only these services and these benefits, not only to our community, but to our employees, to our the people who work so hard in this community. So,
thank you, Alderman Pittner. Any further discussion? Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. I'm going to share some comments overall on why I'm ultimately going to be supporting this budget, and it's an extremely difficult decision because the burden of the cost of this government is now starting to weigh very heavily on it, and we're getting our full picture, and it's hard to look at it, and it's going to even be harder to experience it. But as I see what we've talked about in this is, you know, one of the themes is commitment. We have made a commitment here to the needs of our organization. If we pull out a specific item, the $1 million+ for our enterprise software, an update from a financial software system that's from the early 90s. If we want efficiencies, if we want the organization to improve, we have to be willing to make those types of commitments. We have to be willing to fund those investments. We're making a commitment to our employees. We're stepping up and we're providing a bigger chunk of the benefits. I think we heard very clearly and experienced very obviously that people aren't extremely excited to come work for the City of Minot right now, and that's costing us money. So I think making this investment is actually the wise financial decision, and so I support that. We're also supporting the needs of the community in the region. We're stepping up. We are doing as much as we possibly can on flood protection and NAS. The folks that benefit from those two projects are well outside of Minot. We're being really good neighbors here. And we're also, doing something that I think is really unfortunate to have to deal with, but we're paying for past mistakes. The parking garages are a big item. There are a lot of mills in this particular budget. Unfortunately, I can't figure out how to pay for those past mistakes without literally paying for them. And that's what we're dealing with here. I know the community wants more accountability. They want more assurance that we have learned from those types of mistakes in the past. All I can say is I believe we have. I believe we are. We had an agenda item just last month to address that in terms of documenting the lessons learned in some of these experiences. I also want to touch a little bit on terms of transparency and honesty in the budgeting process. I have been a pretty significant and regular vocal advocate of removing the practice of using direct property tax buy-downs and subsidies to essentially ease the pain in this process. I'm hopeful that we continue to get away from that process because I think that ultimately the manner in which we get regularly accountable government, we get regularly scrutinized spending, starts with not hiding the cost of our government from ourselves. And as we look back over the recent past, it is the property tax buy-downs that I think are a direct contributor. It's a systemic flaw in the way this organization has operated, and the sooner we can get away from that practice and remove our dependency on that subsidy, I think the better off we're going to be. Now, I realize that is very little consolation in the face of one of these increases. Having to look forward 2 to 5 to 10 years to realize that that's the improvement time frame that we're probably talking about in terms of improving these practices. So I'm happy to see us heading that direction. There are a couple pieces inside of this budget that I want to call attention to because I think there are still places we need to improve. One of them is the capital improvement plan. This is a portion of the document in the very far back. I previously had a meeting with our city manager. There's a lot of spending inside of our capital improvement plan, and I have never been a part of a process that delivered those items into the budget. And Mr. Berry, if you would care to speak after my comments to share with the other council members, how that process is evolving, I think we're going to see a much better process next year in terms of evaluating capital projects and being allowed to prioritize them, because we don't have those conversations right now, and we need to, because those capital projects are huge portions of this spending, and we aren't discussing them. We aren't prioritizing them. So a couple things that I also want to keep our eye out for as I think all over, as I've gotten to know this organization and our past practices, the property tax buy-down isn't the only opportunity for us to hide the cost of our government from ourselves. We've got hidden subsidies of particular activities all over the place. And I don't know how we got to this particular position. I see them in the landfill. I see them in just numerous parts of our operation. I think as we become more transparent and more honest, we have to acknowledge some of these hidden subsidies, some of these past practices that were put in place for who knows why. But when we acknowledge them and realize that they may not be working for us or they might not be serving the manner in which we communicate about these decisions, I think we may want to consider changing those practices. I'd also like to see some of the larger items in this budget. Maybe it is a $100,000 crane truck or something like that yes, it was budgeted, but before those types of items go out to bid in the 2019 season, I think we need to reconsider those choices at the time we're making the purchases, similar to the way we do a bidding process. I know one of the items that is jumping out at me in this year's budget is the City Hall retaining wall. I want to have a very significant discussion about that particular project. I don't want it just to arrive in front of us next year with the assumption that a lot of work has been completed and we feel inclined to rubber stamp it and move it through. So I think as all of these larger ticket items move forward through next year's spending, we need to discuss them at that time too. With that, the final theme that I kind of wanted to just bring up is the fact that I think we have a lot to be proud of here in town. This has been an extremely challenging budget, but I think we are demonstrating we've been extremely good neighbors to those outside of the city of Minot. As an example, we make our library available to everybody outside of the city, even though they may not be City Minot residents. They may not pay City of Minot taxes. Our recreation department is the same way. We don't have a are you a city requirement to determine whether they're going to participate in our recreation programs. And then, of course, flood protection and NAWS. The elephant in the room that we haven't acknowledged is we don't have funding to advance flood protection at the pace that I think the community wants to see it advanced. And so we're going to have a conversation about where do we find that funding. And I think it's going to start with making sure that we're very proud of the fact that we have been great regional partners in supporting these projects to the point that they're at right now. And then finally, and I appreciate everybody indulging me this after a long night, but Mr. Barry, I can't express enough the approach you have taken to, I would say, turning the ship with the City of Minot and this organization. I'm looking forward to getting past these difficult decisions, these difficult budgets, and getting to the point where we can look forward and start creating the future that we really want this community to be. So with that, I'm going to support this budget. Once again, thank you for listening.
Any further discussion? Yes, Alderman Padragula.
Although the hour is late, and I think Alderman Walski has said pretty much what I would say, I feel some obligation to just get some things on the record. I have qualms, believe me, I really feel for the taxpayer. I'm a taxpayer too, and so are all of us here. But I think the real issue is that the budget is a reflection of our priorities and our values as a city, and that's, I think, where the discussion has to start and stop, not so much about this mill or that line item or whatever. And what I'm seeing here is a clarification of those issues. I'm seeing it from a process perspective in the sense that this budget process has been much more transparent. We're all agreed on being more accountable, and we've done, particularly the city staff has done a fantastic job of educating and informing people. We may disagree, but on the values, but I think the facts are out there. So I think what I'm seeing here is a stop of the slide and a turning around of the ship, and the ship will be starting to pick up steam. I think we're prioritizing things like water for our community in terms of protecting our residents from flooding and providing a supply of water in the face of drought and climate change, something that has plagued plains for millennia. I think we're expressing a priority for public safety for our police and fire forces in particular. I think we're expressing a priority of value on flood protection. We may disagree on how slow or how fast, but I think we all agree on the value of that. I think we all agree on the need to have better tools so our city government can be more efficient and responsive. I think we agree on the value of our staff and the need to support them, to pay them adequately, to provide them benefits, to provide them leadership and training that they need to do a good job for us, and to expect good customer service and response. So for me, this is about as good as it's going to get. And we have to balance all sorts of conflicting needs, and I think this is the best compromise we can come up with. So I think the budget reflects what I see as the council's priorities, what I see as the city's priorities. I'm going to support it. I think it's the best we can do. Is it perfect? Of course not. But I think we're finally, again, we've stopped the slide, the downhill slide. We're taking responsibility. If you want to look at it more negatively, the chickens have come home to roost, and they're here, and we're dealing with it now. And I think that's very different than we've had before, and I think it's very positive. And I see a lot of room for improvement from further growth here, whether it's in terms of creative ideas for economic development, whether it's better software and accountability, whether it's better treatment of our employees. I think we're moving in an upward direction. I'm very pleased and to see that, and I'm proud of our city. And I think this budget offers a lot of potential. You can't make up for something with nothing. You know, we're making those investments now, and I think we're doing it in a very open-minded fashion based on the facts. So I will be supporting this budget.
Thank you, Alderman Pattagula. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Last time, any further discussion? Kelly, please call the roll.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
No.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight.
No.
Motion passes. That takes us to number 7, adjournment.
Move we adjourn.
Moved
Second.
by Janser, second by Alderman Pittner. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.